all. Welcome to Black America Summit 2. We are Black at it again. This week, we are focusing on community. This is our first week of a 4-week summit, and we're looking at the different movements that have happened over the last year since our last panel over the pandemic. I'm really excited for our first panel, which is on police reform. This is a follow-up panel from last year's police reform panel. I'm going to have Vicky start us off. She will be moderating this panel, so just give her just one moment.
Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Gave you something, you wouldn't know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're Black at it again. This is Black America Summit, and we're in the second year. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to introduce our panelists, and we'll get right into it. We have Dr. Andrea Headley. Please wave to the camera, say hi. And we have attorney Darnell T. Barton.
Hello,
Thank you.
doing?
Hi. So I'm going to start with Dr. Andrea M. Headley, and I will read your bio for the audience that is watching. So Dr. Andrea M. Headley is a criminal justice policy and racial equity scholar. She's an assistant professor at the McCart School of Public Policy at Georgetown University and a visiting scholar of race, policing, and crime at the National Police Foundation. She focuses within the context of policing to identify and locate negative and adverse outcomes, as well as to understand the organizational, managerial, and individual level causes and consequences of such outcomes. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Headley. I will read Darnell Barton's intro. Darnell T. Barton is one of the rising stars in the Michigan legal community. After the death of Trayvon Martin, Mr. Barton felt compelled to bring more awareness to the plight of young Black men and those disproportionately affected by what seemed to be an unjust system. During law school, Mr. Barton sharpened his trial skills as a member of the Board of Advocates and the mock trial traveling team. He also completed a fellowship working with Dulles County elected officials to combat the school to prison pipeline. Thank you so much for joining us, Darnell T. Barton. We also have attorney David Robinson. I will read the bio for attorney David Robinson. Member State Bar of Michigan, Association for Justice National Lawyers Guild, Michigan Chapter Executive Board. David served the Detroit Police Department for 13 years as legal advisor to the department. He also defended officers in civil litigation. As part of his responsibilities, he was required to teach the legal section to recruits in the Detroit Metropolitan Police Academy. Thank you also for being here and having this conversation about police reform, what your position is on police reform after this year of conversations that we've had focused on police reform and abolition. And we want to have you here to explore what has happened over the past year and the current state of affairs and public opinion, as well as the movement. So why don't we have you all start off by stating what your position is on police reform and maybe giving us an introduction of, or a definition of what police reform means to each of you.
Doctor, please. I'm honored to be on the panel with you. Please, you go first.
Oh, thank you. So I think for me, police reform, it's definitely a convoluted term, right? I don't think there's one single thing that it means to me, but I think generally speaking, when I think about it, for me, it means, how can we get to a place where we are living in healthy, thriving, safe communities, whether that's with or without the police. I don't think I have a hard stand on police abolition thus far, but I do think from an evidence perspective, we know the harms that policing practices have historically and contemporarily kind of caused Black and Brown communities. And we know that there are alternatives to policing and the carceral system as a whole that are also effective means for reducing crime and for having kind of real thriving, healthy, vibrant Black and Brown communities. And so I think I try to take a more evidence-based perspective when talking about this topic as a whole. But I think in terms of the current state of where we are with police reform, I think it really depends on where you're located, right? So at the national level, because of the way in which our criminal justice system is organized and really the nature of government in the United States as a whole, focusing specifically here in the States, we know that the federal government has limited power in terms of what it can do at a local level for really impacting police behavior. That said, things like the Justice and Floyd Policing Act, which I won't go into too much, I'll leave it to my attorney friends to do that, but things like that I think definitely make a mark for police accountability, but there's still a lot left up to local and state jurisdictions. And so I think across the states, we see there's a variety of things that different places are trying. And so we've seen certain places actually invest more in policing, and we've seen other places try to really divert funds, right, whether you want to call it defunding or reinvesting or what have you, into alternative community health approaches, violence interruption and things like that. And so I will stop here, but that's kind of my real high level take on police reform. Darnell, I'll turn it over to you.
I think that's it. We're done. Everybody just pack. We're good to go. No, I kid, because I was shaking my head the entire time. Like, I totally agree. When you say police reform, to me, I always think of like the individual officers versus the system of policing. So I have a problem with the system of policing. A lot of the individual officers, come from poor communities, whether white, Black, or whatever, trying to make it to middle class status. So essentially, it's in my opinion, it's like the war versus the rich versus the poor, and they're having poor people combat each other. So, whenever you deal with an officer, you respect the work that they're doing, but at the same time, you understand, most of these gentlemen or women are just trying to make it, as far as financially. So now let's go into the system of policing. Now there's that thin blue line, and there's that opportunity for them to break that code, and some individual officers don't take that. Most do not take that. But there are, and I will go into what Dr. Headley said, there's certain locales where you will see, like Detroit. DPD out here, is different when you go 20 miles up the road to Bloomfield Township or something like that, just how they deal with people. Some of the officers here, they're from the neighborhood, or, so they know what's going on. So I'm big on community policing. I don't want to ramble too much because it's such a broad topic. We could go in all day, but I will say this: I'm big on community policing more so than having government agents, perusing the neighborhood, watching people or things of that nature. So community policing to me is us getting involved in our own communities.
Dano Barton, thank you so much for bringing the question of community up, because that's sort of the next thing that I wanted to touch base on. And thank you so much for both those nuanced perspectives on what the catch-all phrase of police reform might mean in different circumstances. In your communities, professional, personal, what are your community members seeking to understand this very challenging topic, and what has it looked like for people to try to understand and try to suss out and try to study and seek police reform as a catch-all term, given the nuance that you both just gave. And Dr. Hadley, when I start with you, and then we'll turn it over to Darnell Broughton.
I was hoping we started with Darnell this time, but I'll go ahead.
You want me to take it, Doc? I don't mind.
We can go whichever way you'd like. So
I was joking.
if Darnell would love. Okay, great.
I was joking. I'm
Okay.
interested.
Yeah, so I think when we say community, I appreciate Vicky kind of you saying both professional community and kind of community on the ground. I do think of them as a bit separate, and so I'll talk about the professional community first. And so I think from the academic standpoint, when I attend conferences or what have you with people who are study policing, people who are criminologists or studying policing from different academic lens, oftentimes in the debate around police reform, what we're trying to figure out is, well, what do we know about what works? And really, we know very little. Well, we know that a lot of things don't work in terms of police reform, right? And so we can go through the evidence on body cameras, to civilian review boards, to use of force standards. And there's some promising evidence, and then there's evidence that just shows that it's not effective, right? And again, it really depends on where it is, what's happening, the specific nuances. And so I think from an evidence-based perspective and in professional communities, we're trying to focus on, if we're going to be recommending these potential solutions, quote unquote, then we hope it would have an impact. And what do we know about whether it has an impact or not? I think for when we think about people who have lived experiences, though, in Black and Brown communities, right? When we think about them, I think that for I'm in DC. I am new to DC, and so I won't pretend to speak to all of the nuances that are here in DC as a newbie. But from what I do know about the research that I've done kind of in lots of Black and Brown communities across the United States, is that it goes back to the point that I made before, is like, people just want to be safe, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, we all want to be able to live in an environment where we feel we're safe from harm, where we're getting the education, the housing, support, the investments that we need, that we don't have to worry about our kids going outside and something happening to them, right? We don't want to worry about government, harming our children or ourselves or our bodies or discriminating against us, right? I think at the end of the day, that's really the desire that is birthed, I think, or that births the drive for police reform, whether that's wherever you are on the spectrum, from abolition to more, incremental kind of change over time. I think that's really where it comes from. But I guess what I will say is, I think that there is still a lot of appetite for what Darnell said in terms of when we think about community-driven policing, community safety, right? Moving from the institution of policing or the institution of criminal justice and thinking about how we can protect, invest, in our own communities. I think there's a lot of appetite for that.
Absolutely. And I'll just jump. I hate when people say, let me piggyback on that. I always get that person out of the meeting. Like, God. Anyway, here I go saying it anyway. But I will agree. And let me say this. I always, because you mentioned the community and economy, and that's really what it gets down to for me when I think of policing. Because the police are there to protect property, not really you. They respond to things that happen to you, but they're there to protect the property. And that's really the history of them. And since we were the property, So the next thing is how do we now make it financially, or what's the financial incentive for them to lay off us, basically? That's really where we got to get to. And that comes to us utilizing our money in a proper way. What do they say, like $9 trillion we have in spending or something like that? Like that, spending money in the Black community, making sure the dollars circulate so that we own these properties, so that the police protect our property. Those are our properties, and therefore they are in turn working for us. So we say, hey, this is how we want to enforce our property because we own it. So that's one of the things. The second thing is which is most important, because many of the smaller communities are not going to be able to raise the money to be a threat to what I would call white supremacy, because it's not the police. The police are just a form or a unit that are used by different groups, whether it's us or someone else. So who's paying them at this point? My opinion is white supremacists. But anyway, the system of police. But anyway, so what is important right now for those communities that can't afford to combat them in a financial sense, it is using the legal sense. So we need community supervision boards with subpoena power. If they don't have subpoena power, it's you and your auntie and uncle up there talking all night, okay? We need subpoena power. You need to be able to bring an officer into court and say, did you do this? By the way, if you lie, you fall under the risk of perjury. So, that will change. People's insurance companies for these officers will change. Insurance companies for these precincts will change, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you trace back to the money, that'll kind of help us a little bit. But if you don't have the money, the policing power and using the legislation against bad officers and bad policing systems.
Can I add just before we go to the next question?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was about to ask for your thoughts on that, Dr. Hadley, but feel free to jump in whenever you'd like.
Thank you. And so I think the kind of thinking about economy and money is important for a variety of reasons. And so not just what Darnell said, but if I could add to that, right? Oftentimes, I think the rebuts that we hear about why we need police is because of crime. And now with violent crime or gun shootings in particular, kind of higher than they were in more recent years, although still at a pretty, low level. If we think about historical gun violence, that's been used as a kind of impetus to talk about why we still need police, for instance, right? And gun violence is something that has plagued Black and brown communities for decades, right? It's not new. But if we think about why gun violence is concentrated in certain areas, why people commit crime, right? It also goes back to usually economic factors, right? Communities that have been disinvested in, that are, living in poverty, that don't have the resources that they need, right? And so it really boils down to not only, as Darnell would put it, as like when we think about the importance of economy and how we could use that as kind of building, not necessarily a threat to policing, but at least a force, right, to engage with this dominant power. It also helps to remove some power, right, if it also kind of gets at what we know are some of the root causes of why people engage in crime in the first place, right, because they don't have their basic needs met. And those are often due to historical policies and practices that have been in place to intentionally, disinvest in certain communities and groups of people, right? I think we have pretty good research and history on that. And so I think that that's also important to think about when we're talking about this conversation.
I just wanted to say, I don't want to combat policing. It's bad policing, because we are going to need some individuals, preferably people from our community, to stand up, protect our women and children and other individuals. So we will need that, but I mean bad policing. So I apologize for interrupting you, but because I agreed 100% what you said. That was great.
No, that's a great clarification. Yeah, for sure. And okay, one other thing, since this is a conversation, one thing that I think about too, right, particularly because as Darnell was saying, right, when we think about systems of oppression, whether that's white supremacy, right, or whatever you want to call it, systemic racism or what have you, those systems manifest in different ways. And policing is the one we're talking about today, but they also manifest in housing and healthcare and all of these other services. And so when the conversation on police reform that's talking about, community-based alternatives, it's talking about shifting to social work, health-based approaches, it's also important to keep these conversations in mind, because systemic oppression and racism perpetuates in all of these systems, right? And so when we all shift to new systems, although it's not the same types of harm, it may not be bodily physical harm, right, which is good, there's still other forms of harm that can be perpetuated if we're not really clear and intentional about how we're trying to use and design these new systems.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of those perspectives. And I see Darnell Barton clapping and Dr. Hadley clapping. There's nothing to do but clap and snap. Thank you so much for bringing the conversation of historic, economic, financial, legal factors that need to be considered in this conversation. And I just wanted to hear your perspectives on what you think about the public conversation surrounding police reform and how it has changed over the past year, and whether you see these factors that you were discussing just now being factored in, and what you'd like to see the conversation, the direction that you see the conversation go?
I'll jump on this one first. So I guess you would say the conversation, I guess at that time when it was really boiling up, was very confrontational, and understandably so. We are, in fact, we were mad. You know, and some of us are still mad. However, I think it's dying down a little bit. Maybe the rhetoric died down a bit, which is it's kind of and I'm sorry to kind of be on the fence here, but maybe it's because I'm closer. I'm a millennial too, I guess. I don't know. So I'm kind of in this position where I feel I understand the young people who are saying, no, F that. We're tired, you know, defund the police, you know, and we want the rhetoric to speak on that. And we want it to be harsh, and we want it to be in your face and brash. And so I understand that, because we don't have, we've done the niceties. Okay. We're pissed off, and we don't have time and we're not going to sit here and be oppressed. So deal with it. You're the one oppressing us. We're not going to capitulate to you. So I understand that. Then I understand on the other side, you have kind of like this older generation, maybe like that boomer generation also, who are saying, you know, look, we're here in the legislature. We can try our best to make whatever possible that you're trying to do. However, you need to understand there are certain parameters in place, and there's all they thought of this stuff. They thought of this. So you have to know it's chess, not checkers. And essentially there's this impasse with us in our community as far as how do we approach this? Do we take it the nice way, or do we say, you know, do we go like Tupac? He said, you know, banging on the door, you know, we're hungry, let us in. So I'm a little on the fence, but if I always had to choose, I'm always going to go with the more radical side. So I'm always for banging on the fence, like, hey, let us in. So I think I commend and appreciate the young people that were out there protesting. We had our time that we did that. So you are a necessary component of the civil rights movement. There is a next component that you need to be paying attention to and understanding and learning from people like Dr. Headley and all these other people. But you're doing your part by, as they say, turning up. We need you to turn up respectfully to the community, respectfully to us. Okay. So anyway, I'm sorry if I rambled a bit, but I'm still on the fence.
That's totally fine. I love what you said about turning up respectfully, because I think it sort of illustrates very well your straddling the fence of, there is this perspective of being nicer, and there's this perspective that's saying police should go.
Can I say, I apologize for interrupting. Can I use this one example, right? So it's like for the younger people who are gang affiliated, we deal with a lot of different individuals. We have like Ceasefire, we have former gang members that help young men. So we always talk to some of the gang members, and we talk to them like, yo, listen, if your OG says this person's off limits and you go and press that person, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? So we need to respect the OGs in our community. We need to educate them on stuff. Hey, OG, listen, this is what's happening out here. You're not on the corners. You don't see what's happening. Okay, now they can make an educated response based on what we need to do as the gang. So if our community is such, we need to keep the OGs informed, get that information, and then move as such. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. Thank you for that clarification and that extension to your point. Dr. Healy, any thoughts?
Yeah, and so I think I'm also on the fence. You know, I am a millennial as well, and so I think, although I fight police reform from, like, you know, with the pen, if you will, and with evidence and research, right? I think that there's a part of me that totally understands and resonates with the anger. Like, I get angry too, right? I'm like, this is my community, people that look like me, right? That are being impacted every day, right? Family and friends and all of that, you know? And so I totally understand where the anger comes from and why it's expressed in different ways. And I think it needs to be expressed in different ways if we're really going to try to make any change, right? And oftentimes it is like the people who are protesting on the streets or what have you, that bring enough attention so that the people who are in decision making positions or in making laws or trying to advocate can then have the floor to do so, right? And so I think it's important that we have people on all kind of sides of the spectrum doing this work in the different ways with the different skill sets that they have. That said, though, in terms of how it's changed this over the last year, I think it is something that I have thought a lot about, and I struggle with a simple answer because I think sometimes we talk about the Black community as a monolithic group, and I think Darnell's points, even just about the generational differences, point out how it's not, right? That there's generational differences. There's differences with the Black community who are immigrants versus the Black community who are, native born or what have you, right? And how they want to approach police reform. We can all agree on the problem and know that this is a problem, and then have different ways in terms of trying to go about it. And so I think we've seen, particularly, again, going back to the narratives, and not just the narratives, but the realities of violence that has been happening, particularly of late and during COVID and things like that, we see that there are more, in terms of public opinion polls at least, that there are Black individuals in the States who are saying, no, we don't want police to go anywhere, right? And it gets back to this idea that Darnell said of like, no one wants bad policing, right? Like nobody wants police abuse and bad policing or systems of oppression, right? As opposed to just focusing on an individual officer. But again, we all want to feel protected and safe. And I think the way in which the conversation's changed is still around this idea of how to get to this safe, protected place that we want to be. But I don't know. I do wonder if we've lost some impetus. And I don't know the answer to that, and maybe it's community dependent too, like depending on where we're talking about and what's happening. But I do wonder kind of to what extent, some of the rallying for change and things like that has died down a bit, and to what extent we're going to kind of see history repeat itself, right? Police reform is not new. It dates back decades and decades and decades. We can go back to Rodney King and the Kerner Commission and commissions after that, right? And so it's not a new phenomena, right? And oftentimes there's a lot of cries for change, and sometimes there's a little bit of change made, but the system still kind of remains the same. And so I hope, and I'm hopeful that this is different, and the timing is different. But I do wonder, to what extent things maybe have died down a little.
Thank you so much for those perspectives. And Dr. Hadley, I would like to piggyback off of something that you just said and sort of latch onto it and dive deeper into it. I like what you said about the Black community not being a monolith. Bad policing particularly affects different areas and different communities of Black people differently. And so Darnell Barton, you can speak to the legal aspect of this, and Dr. Heatley, you can speak to the academic research-based aspect of this, but we wanted to know how heavy policing sort of impacts minority communities within Black America. So people who may be part of the LGBTQIA community, women, immigrants as well. Would you love to speak to what we see and how differently it impacts those communities?
Take it away, Darnell.
Okay, I got you. So I was literally writing it down so I didn't forget why, because when you were talking, I'm listening, like, all right, let's go. So let me make sure I understood the question correctly. You said how heavy policing has impacted certain sections within our community. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I think whenever conversations about police reform, especially over the past year that we've had, the conversation has sort of surrounded on a specific area or a specific subset of the Black community, mainly Black men. And we just wanted to know what research and what your legal experience has sort of shown you about how differently it impacts those communities.
Absolutely. So I'm sorry, I was writing it down because each one has its own dynamic. So please allow me to state it briefly. If I start talking too long, tell me to move on. So I'm going to go with the LBGT community, then I'm going to go with Black women, and then I'm going to go with Black men. And obviously the kids are affected through all this, right? So the LBGT community, and this is just from my experience, I'm not a part of that community, but I support anti-oppression. So I'm all about not oppressing anyone, no reason you shouldn't be oppressed based on your preference. So anyway, here we go. It affects them. Heavy policing affects them, a section of that community, when it comes to how they deal with domestic violence in that community, how they deal with alleged prostitution in that community, and how they deal with drug use in that community. Now, the drug use and the drug use, it spans for all three sections that I'm talking about. So the LGBT community, Black women, and Black men. So how over policing hurts those three entities speaks for itself. It's ridiculous. So with Black women, when we talk about Black women with over policing, you have, for example, which is I'm gonna give a different example, right? So you have. I was a former prosecutor. I don't want to get into the whole thing. I went to go be behind the scenes and make sure they were doing the right thing. Long story short, I ran the domestic violence court for a little while, and I've seen so many cases. I've seen a lot of cases where the woman was coming and saying, listen, this is too much for my family. Like it wasn't even that serious. It was this and that. Well, ma'am, I understand, but it's in the system now. You know, we have to do X, Y, and Z. There has to be certain things that have to be done. So even if you feel this way, there are other women who are doing this because they're still enduring this abuse and they just want to get it over with. Well, it's going to keep occurring, sis, and we need to address that so you can truly protect your family. You know, so the over policing will be the fact that they won't even try and get this young man. I'm just assuming in this case, but there were female defendants in other cases, but realistically, we're talking about a lot of young brothers here. This young man needs help because he's going to do this to another young lady somewhere else. We can't just throw him in a box and then it's over with. What are we doing? There's a family unit here, and in most of these cases, there are children involved. So I have a young man right now. I just left that's why I was running from court just now, and I apologize for coming late. You know, same thing. His the complaining witness's mother, meaning the young lady who is the complainant, her mother appeared. She's calling me profusely. She's calling, but she says, look, they're young people. They're doing dumb stuff. Excuse my language. They're doing dumb stuff. But this young man is about to face 5 years in jail because of his past being stupid, and now he's in here. He's working. He pays the bills. He's doing all this, and then he's stupid, and he put his hands on this woman. What are you doing? But does he need to go to jail for 5 years for this? So when you say how it's affecting Black women, she's got 2 kids every day, waking up. Anybody who has kids, man, please, it's not easy. So now she's got to do this every day on her own, and she didn't do anything. She was the victim. So how does it affect Black women? I got a whole book on that. We can do that. Black men, the obvious that we're going into prisons, we're going into these jails, etc. But what we don't see is the economic effect. When you come out of there, you still owe restitution in most cases. You still owe these money. So when they're having issues seeing their kids and child support or whatever's coming at them, and the baby mom is like, yo, what's popping? I got bills to pay. Give me some money for the kids to eat, which is realistic. They have to eat. He's saying, man, I got restitution. I got prison fees. I got all these other things. And they will come and put him back in jail. Now he's in jail. He gets back out of jail. He has a record. How do you get a job? It's not easy. Yeah, it's possible. Oh, I know somebody who went to jail and had a job. Yeah, there's people who have not been in jail and can't get a job. It's hard. It's not easy. And now with this pandemic or whatever have you. So anyway, last thing, we already know the kids. The kids are the most affected. When I see these videos of the officers playing basketball with the kids and stuff like that, of course I love to see, anybody enjoying kids. Yeah, that's great. But I always get upset immediately after that because I'm thinking those aren't the kids you need to be dealing with. You need to be dealing with the kids whose parents are locked up and showing up, helping their parent get help. Like show the video of you in prison with their parent reading a book, going through breathing exercises, like whatever it is, like a montage. of you actually helping the community, because going to play basketball with these kids is not giving these kids a good perception of you when 20 minutes later they're going to walk to the store and seeing somebody get arrested in a manner that we probably would think is not right. You know what I mean? Even though we don't know the circumstances. So sorry for rambling, but heavy policing harshly impacts our community.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that. Absolutely. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Healy.
Sorry about that. I would totally agree. I think that it definitely impacts the entire community, right? From, people with different identities within the Black community to the youth. I mean, I won't, kind of belabor the point about the youth, but I could not agree more that we really need to talk about the ways in which it impacts youth, not just from, like physical impacts, but like psychological harms, trauma, mental health, like so many different ways, emotional well-being, right, that it impacts. But the one point I think that I would just add, because I think Darnell did a good job providing examples, is that unfortunately, it's so hard to document the way in which, from a research perspective. And so also, let me differentiate between like my quantitative hat when we want numbers and stats versus like kind of qualitative narrative, storytelling, et cetera, right? I'm someone who values both as data, but more often than not, people kind of skew towards wanting to see the numbers and stats. And so I think from that perspective, we don't do a good job in terms of actually being able to identify people who have so many different kind of identities that they identify with in the Black community, right? And so when we think about LGBTQ, plus communities, right, the way in which they're kind of, gendered or sexualized or what have you, like, is often based on the police officer's kind of assessment of whatever they think that person is, right? And so it's so hard to even start unpacking the ways in which these harms are different for different subgroups within the Black community, because we don't respect identities enough to even, start documenting that. But from more of the kind of storytelling narrative perspective, I think we do see that there are clear ways in which, specifically thinking about people who have different gender or sexual identities, the way in which not only do they kind of sometimes experience the same types of like general policing harms from arrest and use of force, but then because they are often dehumanized or their identities are shamed or what have you, right, that there's an additional layer because of the intersectional identity that they have, right? And so, and I don't think we even have good ways of capturing some of those non-material harms of policing, right? But I think generally we do know that the harms extend beyond just whether or not you have a criminal record, right? It extends into, the whether or not you can get a job, the types of, public benefits that you have access to, the, places maybe that you may or may not live because of your immigrant status. There's some really great research that talks about the way in which immigrant community members kind of try to take signals based on where they think too much police activity is neighborhoods when trying to decide where to live, because they're so nervous about their status, right? And not being harassed or deported or whatever the case is, right? And so it bleeds into all of these different areas, of public life, from civic engagement and onwards. And I think those compound or get more nuanced depending on the specific, communities within the Black community that you're talking about.
Great
I
point.
see Donald, yes, I see Donald nodding his head. There are so many great points and so many different ways of looking at the quantitative and the narrative aspects of it. And thank you for bringing both aspects of those conversations into this one.
Can I, Ms. Vicky,
Absolutely.
I apologize. I just wanted to, because
this is a conversation. It should be going back and forth.
Is it Dr. Headley? Because I want to pronounce your name properly and respect.
Dr. Headley.
Headley. Okay, I
Dr.
just
Headley.
want to make sure I was saying it right, because I want, listen, all we have is our name, So you brought up a great point about like how we can't even there's no way of quantifying the actual harms in certain cases, especially with the LGBT community and also women. And where I'm going with this is there's a lot of sexual repression, sexual tension, a lot of sexual mischievousness when it comes to certain officers in dealing with the LGBT community and women. So, I mean, I'm 1,000% sure every woman has dealt with an officer and felt like he pulled you over because he was really trying to holler at you or something like that. Like that happens a lot. And even if it's just your perception, the fact that that is a perception to have is a problem. So I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just wanted to say you can't quantify that. How many times can you say? It's almost like when you say racism nowadays. It's like, how can you quantify it? Like he didn't have a KKK sign up, so he's not racist. Like, okay.
Thank you for hammering that point home, because a lot of those things do often go unseen and uncaptured and unaddressed. So thank you both for hammering that home. To pivot entirely and sort of a more uplifting note, I hope, I'd like you both to talk about how you see us getting to a point where whatever system is used, whatever system of policing that is used, both ensures that our communities are safe. Dr. Headley, what you were talking about. Mental health concerns are addressed as appropriately as well as crime that needs to be addressed. How do you see us getting to that point, and what concerns do you see coming up when there's an immediate or drastic reducing or eliminating the present function of police? And I think, Dr. Headley, you might have touched on this, on replacing current policing with social service work and the problems that might bring. Do you have any more explorations that you might want to provide? I think I'll start with Dr. Headley this time. Thank you for correcting my pronunciation.
No, it's fine. And so I am a huge proponent of social services, right, and the importance of it. And so I will say, like, although I think my point is that we should never just think, right, that all of a sudden, racism or oppression is going to disappear because we put it in a new system. But I think, and I do think that there are people in the Black community who are having these conversations and are being really intentional about trying to make sure, if we're going to have violence interrupters or social workers, like, let it be people from our community, like Darnell said, let it be people who are trained, with trauma informed, practices or whatever the case is, and so I think these conversations are being held, but I think it's important to continue to kind of ring the alarm so that in 20 years, we're not like, oh crap, like we created this new system and here we all are all again in like institutionalized or whatever the case may be, right? Like, God forbid that would happen, and so I think, though, to the point about maybe the first part of the question, if I understand correct, is thinking about kind of maybe what's promising or what's hopeful in terms of where we could go. And then maybe concerns is the latter part of the question with regards to kind of eliminating the current system. And so I think for me, one of the things that I am hopeful for is the amount of conversations that are being had at a federal level, but also in different localities about actually investing dollars in alternatives to policing, or not, even if you don't want to call it alternatives, but investing dollars in that social service provision aspect, because I do think it's important. And I think that there's clear research that shows the benefits of when you have mental health services, when you have nonprofits focusing on violence interruption, when you have substance abuse programs, when you have housing, affordable housing, programs or what have you, that all of those lead to, reduced crime, better outcomes and outputs, right, for communities of color and things like that. And so I'm hopeful that dollars, because I think the economy point is usually, unfortunately, in a capitalistic society, economy is kind of usually what matters the most, right? Where the dollars go, where we're investing, right? And so I think the fact that there's conversations being had and allocations being made to really support those services and support community-based, public safety strategies, this is really promising. I think that, to me, I think that's probably one of the most hopeful avenues. And I think even at the federal level, again, like I said before, like the federal government is limited to the extent in which it makes a big dent, but the fact that they have allocated dollars to investing, for localities investing in this, I think is really promising. In terms of the latter part of the question with regards to concerns with the current system, I think I agree with Darnell in the beginning when he was kind of saying that, like, we do need somebody who's going to be able to like protect communities and take on that role, right? And so I do think there is a role, whether it's police as we know it or some other type of way, a role for some organization or communities to kind of make sure that we are protecting ourselves and things like that. I do think that there will be a role for that. So I don't think we can have no police departments tomorrow, right? Or even in 10 years. And maybe I am a pessimistic person and I would love to be proven wrong on this, And so like, I'm all for it. But I do think that we can definitely limit the powers and authorities of policing as we know it, while also doing some of the other strategies that I've talked about already to, get to a better place and really try to prevent and hold accountable bad policing practices at an organizational level as well as individual officers.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Headley. I'm going to turn it over to you, Darnell.
So let me think. Okay, hopeful. So I am like Dr. Headley. I'm hopeful that we allocate these dollars to social services or what they say alternatives to policing, or what we know as policing today. I think mental health is a huge issue, especially in our community. I'm also I hate when people do this and start dropping all this stuff, but I'm also the lead attorney here in 36th district, which is like the third largest district, busiest district in the nation. I'm the lead attorney for the mental health court here. And I could tell you, there should be more people in our court. There's so many people that when I was a former prosecutor that I used to send to the mental health court and they would send them back. They're fine. Like, what? Like, no, you know what I mean? Like, anyway, so it's a big thing for me when it comes to mental health, because some of these individuals also have children. And so the children are suffering through the process of this parent going through not only the criminal justice system, but their mental health issues, which it's so crazy because our mental health court, the way we do, we help them with everything, like housing, we had a young man, I'm sorry to ramble real quick, but we had a young man, he was too cold in his, he worked for the supermarket thing and they kept having him go in and out. So he was going to quit his job because he was like, I'm too cold. And we're like, no, brother, we'll get you thermals. Will you go back to work if we get you thermals? Well, yeah, if I'm warm. Because in his mind, he doesn't understand, like, bro, this is it. Like, you out on the street, so your cousin ain't gonna let you stay on the couch much longer. But he doesn't have the capacity to really understand that. So we as the community have to rally around him and say, hey, brother, what do you need to complete your job? Thermals? That's light. Okay, somebody go run, and we got it to him that day. So mental health, very big. Unarmed officers. We need unarmed officers, especially if we're having social work. I'm not saying every officer is unarmed. That would be stupid. What I mean is unarmed officers for specific reasons. What are we talking about? For example, somebody has a warrant out for a traffic violation. Why does that person need a weapon? It's a traffic infraction. Okay, I can't tell you how many times I had traffic issues with someone, and I'm like, I think about the process again as I'm going through, and me being a young black man myself, or young is a relative term, y'all be nice. Anyway, I see the officer coming up to the car, your heart beating, you're going through all this, blah, 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 and this guy is at any moment 2 seconds away from pulling out his gun and blasting you away, whether it's justified or not. I'm not painting the picture all cops are bad. I don't really care about all that. I just care about my community. So I don't care what you guys are doing or who's bad or I don't give a shit. If he's bad and you're not bringing him out, we'll bring him out. Period. So that's that. Last thing is qualified immunity. They got to get rid of it or amend it or something so that these individual officers will have to make decisions based family decisions the same way we make family decisions. What does that mean? As and I speak from a black male perspective. But again, I'm sure black women and people from the LGBT community can speak differently, or maybe they relate exactly to this. But I always feel like I'm making a family decision when they pull me over. Whether I reach for my wallet, reach for my whatever, I'm a CPL holder. So I also have to let them know, hey, there's a weapon in the car. My wife battles with that. Well, guess what? I'd rather be judged by 12. What does it say? Judged by 12 than carried by 6. But that's a risk I take every day. and I'm legal. I'm an attorney. I'm a former prosecutor. I was with the, and I still have these issues. So yes, that's important to me. When they have to make a family decision, things will change. When that pension is on the line, when you could be, we saw, it was funny because I'm sorry, and I won't ramble any further after this. We saw what's this guy's name with George Floyd, Daniel. No, what is it? Why do I blanked his name out for whatever reason? The guy who killed him or whatever. But we saw him go, like, this whole processing went so smooth, and so everybody jumped on board and all this other stuff. And everybody's like, yeah, see, the system is working. And I said, what you have to understand is the fact that we had to go all through this tells you the system's not working. The fact that we even are excited that this one officer is going through this, and we can assume, or we know for a fact that these same situations happen every day in different communities, especially Black communities all over. I'm sure in other communities too, but it happens in Black communities all over. So we know this is happening. Where are these officers? Where are they? We need to bring them out. T.I. said, bring them out. Let's go. Let's put these guys away, because they need to be off the streets. They're dangerous. They're more dangerous than the guy they're worried about catching and apprehending. Because his auntie, the guy that we're trying to catch and apprehend, his auntie and his uncle live in that same neighborhood. You don't. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry. Concerns. Yeah, my concern, briefly, sorry to waste time, but my concern is that I go back to that generational thing that I feel. My concern is that the older generation will not communicate with the younger and vice versa, and they're going to use one of us against the other, the divide and conquer tactic, and we're going to be right back to our omnibus crime bill like in the 80s, where we got the crack numbers up exorbitantly high, like 100 to 1, and we had people in our community who were saying yes, that's a good idea. And now here we are, a generation later, with a devastated generation. I have friends, kids that we grew up with in that generation that would probably still be, if they hadn't been killed in jail or stuff like that. You know what I mean? So, I'm sorry, Hillary, calling us super predators, it still resonates. I'm that guy. We were those kids that were wilding in Central Park. I'm from New York City. We were those kids. We weren't wilding and beating up people. We didn't have no parents at home. We had no food at home. We was running around the streets because we were just, what we gonna sit in the closet? So when they characterize us like that, it gets, you see, I'm getting upset thinking about that. It's ridiculous. But that's how they painted us, and then that's how the media took it. And so now we wilding in the streets. We're super predators. So yeah, that's my concern, that we're gonna get back to that. But hopefully we don't. Hopefully we all stay woke, and we don't let this inner fighting, what is it, intersectionality fighting and all, like, we gotta get over that, like, fast. The boat is sinking. Who cares who ate what on the ship? Let's go.
Can I just say two things? I know we're at time, and I know there's a question also by the audience, but I think another concern that I would say that I think is important is that even when we think about kind of at the federal policies that are being put in place, or at least talked about, in order to address violent crime and then also hold police accountable, one of the things, while I was definitely optimistic about Biden's kind of plan for violent crime because it was so comprehensive and it didn't just focus on the criminal justice system, one of the things that I think was missing is that the talk about, when we measure success, we're going to measure it in terms of crime rates. And I think crime rates are an important measure, and it gets us away from arrests at least, but it's what are the measurements for problematic police behavior? It cannot just be, police shootings. I think police shootings or police killings of Black and brown bodies Black and brown individuals need to be measured, but like the harms of policing extend so much beyond that. And it's the everyday stop and frisk. It's the everyday not feeling like you can't walk to the store in peace, right? That are not necessarily, gets to the level of someone's life being taken, which is obviously, the worst outcome, but it still has devastating impacts on people, right? And so we can't just look at whether or not these strategies are impacting crime or what have you, right? But we need to also think about, are these strategies at what cost, right? What are the costs that of whatever strategies we're putting, and making sure we're really clear about trying to measure those, because oftentimes it's just the Black community has to live with the cost, right? And in terms of the larger conversation or the documentation, we don't see that. I wish we had more time to talk about qualified immunity as a whole. My one caveat with qualified immunity is that I think oftentimes people, and it's not specific to qualified immunity actually, but I think sometimes people want such a simple answer, right? Like, let's get rid of qualified immunity. Let's go to the question in the chat. Let's have Black officers, for instance. Let's just have a civilian review board. But it's like each of those accountability measures are important for very specific types of outcomes, right? So qualified immunity gets at the problematic officer, right? But if we think about, what about that system now? Or what about, like the behaviors that don't reach the level of deadly force but are still really bad, right? Nobody wants to be pulled over 10 times because they're Black regardless, and so again, like getting at, we need lots of different accountability measures to get at kind of the system that's problematic, and so I will stop there.
I just wanted to add to that great point about qualified immunity too, because we still want officers to do their job. Meaning, if we have an officer, Black officer, green officer, whatever, if somebody's trying to rob my mom, I need that officer to have in his mind that if he's doing his duty properly, he can go ahead and exchange fire or do whatever he needs to do to protect my mom. So yeah, that's why it's a nuanced argument. So people say, just get rid of qualified. It's deeper than that. You still need the officer to be able to do his job, but you don't want these bad officers to feel like, hey, anything is my job. Anything is in my jurisdiction. Like, whoa. No, it's not. So, great point, Dr. Headley.
Well, we're almost at time, and I think you've done a bit of a good job addressing the question from the audience that we have from the chat. And I'll just like to thank you so much. Thank you both for taking this time to have this conversation, and ask if you have any last words, how people can follow what you're doing, purchase a book, donate, and yeah, just a minute for each of you. I'll start with you, Darnell, and then Dr. Headley.
Okay, I'll keep it real brief. Right now, like I said, I'm in Detroit. Come check me out on TikTok. I do a whole bunch of silly, goofy stuff on there. I love it. My clients love it. But no, I'm not selling a book, but shout out to Dr. Headley and everyone else who does have books. Please reach out and grab those things. It's important. That goes back to cycling the Black dollar. Like, there's a reason why we put these books together. It's not just because we want to sell and make. There's valuable information in there, but there's also a business structure in place that allows us as these professionals to write these books and keep the information flowing. So I kind of get irritated every time we always, we're going to show love with me. And then it's like, hey, can you buy my book, or can you come to my show, or can you, whatever it is. And then, and then they show up with something from Dominant Culture or something like, a Fendi bag. It's like, come on, man, really? Like that, you giving it to Fendi or whoever. Like, it could be a dude. You giving it to Joy, you giving it to Nike, bro. You could come to my concert. Really? So anyway, just check me out there. Like I said, if you're in Detroit, or if you have family in Detroit or whatever have you, tell them to hit me up, because we don't just do criminal defense at my firm. We also do civil litigation, landlord tenant stuff. We really just try to protect the community. And if I don't have the capacity to do it, I get you to whoever you need. But we're here for the community. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate you. Dr. Headley, it was an honor to be on the stage with you. And Vicky, thank you so much for having me. I'll be quiet now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us your perspective. Dr. Headley, any last words?
Yeah, and so I'd also just like to thank you all for having me. I think it was a great conversation, and I love all being able to like do panels that are not just like academic audiences, where I get to engage with different people. And so I'm glad I got to share the stage with Attorney Barton, and maybe there'll be a Barton and Headley book one day. Put a pin in it, and we'll shout out Black America Summit.
Hey, not to cut you, Doctor, but all jokes aside, I'm actually in DC for a mental health conference. I think it's next week. I don't even know, but I'll definitely try to get your email information.
Yeah, definitely.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And so yeah, I guess I am not as cool as Darnell, so I don't have TikTok or anything, but I have Twitter. And people can feel free to reach me though, kind of via email or my website. I saw someone ask for I think Darnell's TikTok in the chat, and so I don't know if we can put that in there, but if someone can put that in,
I don't even know how to. I'm sorry, I don't even know how to add the chat. I don't know where it is, but my TikTok is Barton Law PLLC. So you can email me or go to my website. It's bartonlawpllc.com. That's BARTONLAW. P is in Paul, L is in Larry, L is in Larry, C is in Charles.com. Thank you guys. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
You actually have a product on the market ready to go.
No. I think the last thing though I would say is just like thank you all to everyone who's listening, the audience, and everyone who's interested in this topic and interested in kind of keeping the fight alive and doing, continuing this work, right? I think it's important that we're all in different spheres doing this work. And it's important that we all kind of encourage each other, right? Like this is tiring work. Black joy matters. Happiness matters. Like we need to sustain ourselves, right? To be able to do this in our respective realms. And so I think that's important. But other than that, I will turn it back over to you, Vicki.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. I cannot begin to express how thankful we are for you both taking the time to have this conversation and to talk through this. And I loved seeing the interpersonal dynamics that we just observed. You're going to be in DC, you're going to meet up, you're going to write a book. We would love to see it. It's a great segue into our next section for people who are going to be joining us in our next section. It's titled Healthy Community Dynamics, that you just saw on display between Dr. Headley and Darnell Barton just now. So make sure to join us and we'll see you in the next section. Thank you so much again.
Like, do you even know who you are? Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Give me something, you ain't know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Dottie.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
All right. Let me just get this started by introducing our panel topic and our structure for this. First, let me say hello and welcome everyone to Black America Summit 2. We are Black at it again. And with us today for this particular panel is Dottie Hernandez. And this panel is going to focus on the healthy community dynamics. And so communities are built on interpersonal relationships. So rarely do we identify healthy versus toxic communal relationships. So we're going to unpack a little bit how to figure out those red flags over here. And so this structure is a little bit different than our previous ones. Dottie's only going to be with us for a half hour. So we're going to start with her. Dottie is a behavioral health case manager for the Sacramento Native American Health Center. She is a community health worker specializing in adult mental health, crisis intervention, and trauma-informed care and community resource building. So thank you, Dottie, for joining us for this panel.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. So before I share my screen with you, I do have a small PowerPoint presentation. I just want to share a little bit about where I come from. I've worked in the community health field for over 15 years. I'm certified and extensively trained in nonviolent crisis communication, meaning that when somebody is in crisis, rather than going straight for physical restraint or any kind of policing that involves, automatic violence, we communicate. We start first with communication, and we work together to de-escalate the situation in a way that doesn't result in physical harm or death. I do work currently at the Sacramento Native American Healthcare Center, which is in Sacramento, California. It's a nonprofit, federally qualified health center. So we really serve as a safety net for the poorest, most vulnerable individuals in the community. Unfortunately, in Sacramento, that generally means we are seeing a lot of Black and Brown individuals and families who are on Medicare and Medicaid and are seeing us because they're not able to get health care anywhere else.
Right.
So what I want to do before I get into the friendship piece of it or in the relationship piece of it is I want to briefly touch on how social determinants of health affect communities, because all of these stressors exist that disproportionately affect communities, especially Black communities and Brown communities, and Indigenous communities in different ways than they do white communities. So we have to be able to look at things kind of from a public health perspective, where you end up seeing how all of these stressors end up affecting the individual and the individual's ability to make meaningful, trusting relationships, and how that ends up bouncing back up to the community as a whole.
Right.
So I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully it works. Okay. Oh. Can everybody, are you guys able to see me?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay, perfect. So, social determinants of health. This came from the Kaiser Family Foundation, which does an exceptional amount of research involving public health outcomes. If you see the social determinants of health, you'll notice across the top there are different ones. You'll see economic stability, neighborhood and physical environment, education, food, community, safety, and social context, and the healthcare system. So we know that there's a growing body of evidence that shows that social factors play a huge role in shaping health outcomes in communities. And that's what's called a social determinant of health. We've also observed that social determinants of health look different in communities comprised of people of color than they do in white communities. And I'm sure you can see as we start to look underneath some of these topics, for example, under community, safety, and social context, exposure to violence and trauma, policing, justice, and policy. Obviously, Black communities experience a higher exposure to violence and trauma at the hands of policing, and end up incarcerated. And because of that, it ends up coming down here to the bottom where you see functional limitations. People end up with chronic health issues. Their life expectancy goes down, and they, generally speaking, will have greater morbidity, meaning issues like diabetes, alcoholism, things like that, that are shaping their health outcomes and their ability to engage in their community. So social determinants of health disproportionately affect African Americans, and this is from the Century Foundation. Disparities still exist across health conditions when comparing African Americans and whites, including maternal mortality, infant mortality, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and other health issues. Social factors including economic disadvantage, inequities in education, and lack of access to health care impact a person's ability to lead a healthy and productive life. For people in American society that experience racism and inequality in their daily lives and throughout their lifespan, the impact of social factors on health are the most grave. So, sorry, I'm going to go back. I apologize.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Let me just exit my screen. So, can you still see my screen?
No, it stopped sharing.
Okay. Maybe 1 second. Are you able to see it now?
Not yet. Oh, there we go.
Okay. So if you go on the Kaiser Family Foundation, they actually have this table that you can manipulate. It's the share of adults that experience loss of employment. And you can actually change this right here in order to change time periods. And you'll see the differences. So for example, experience loss of employment income in the past 4 weeks. This is for the time period between April 28th and May 10th of this year. You see that there's a big difference between the white percentage here and the Black and Hispanic. Another example, delayed medical care in last 4 weeks due to pandemic. You see the same kind of pattern.
Right.
Symptoms of depression or anxiety. Again, you see the same type of pattern. And it's generally the same no matter how much you change it and you go through the time period.
Right.
So there's a big difference here that affects people's relationships. Healthy communities really are something that have to be built from the inside. So let me go ahead and go back to my presentation. So healthy communities really need to emphasize personal connections, meaning we're making them and we're maintaining them to empower individuals to avoid isolation. I'm sure everybody here, because of COVID, understands how difficult it is for us to maintain our social connections when a lot of us are working from home, or we're in a workspace where we're not allowed to really go out and visit our coworkers, or we're just isolated in general. Community leadership should be comprised of a mix of community individuals, not just those that are the most wealthy, educated, and healthy. This fosters.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
But we're still on the KFF slide.
Oh, no problem. Give me 1 second.
No problem.
So I'll go ahead and continue talking while I'm focusing on this.
Yes, please. Thanks.
So community building. So we already know that people have a tendency, especially Black and brown folks, not to see their doctor. And there's a lot of things that affect that. One of the reasons why is a lack of trust. So part of that means that we need to have individuals who are part of the Black community and the brown community who are leading the discussion in how to access healthcare. So if you just give me 1 moment. Okay. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, it's coming up. There we go.
Okay. Thank you. So let's go ahead and go back. So the emphasis on personal connections, we're making them and we're maintaining them to empower individuals to avoid social isolation. Community leadership should be comprised of a mix of community individuals, not just those that are the most wealthy, educated, and healthy. This helps foster trust. So when we go to see our doctors, we go to see our pastors, they should be people that look like us. It's a lot easier to go and talk to somebody about what's going on within your family. Or, for example, if you're experiencing domestic violence, when you feel a connection towards the person that you're talking to, when they look like you, when they've come from your community, when they're able to speak your language, it makes a big difference. If you're coming in to see the same person who uses words and language that you don't understand, perhaps a lot of medical jargon,
Right.
it's a lot less likely that you're going to want to talk to them about what's going on. There's a really big push in the primary care community to have doctors who are doing depression screenings with families and that are also asking about intimate partner violence. And it's extremely difficult because a lot of times if people come in to see their physician or see a nurse practitioner, it can take several times for them to finally admit what's going on before they say something. The other thing that's really helpful is if people have a friend that they can go to the doctor with and there's something going on, they have that friend there to support them. You're much more likely to talk to somebody about what's going on if you have somebody there to support you versus what happens if you're alone. Because oftentimes you'll end up feeling too scared to end up saying something. So that's really important. The other part of it is destigmatizing mental health, which allows for personal disclosure of experiences in safe settings. Within Black communities as well as Brown communities, it's still very taboo to talk about mental health, to talk about not feeling well, to say, hey, I haven't been able to eat. I haven't been able to see my friends. I haven't been able to function or go to work. It's still very taboo. And part of that is because, okay, I feel like that. Where am I going to go? Who do I see? Do I tell my doctor that? Do I tell my pastor that? Do I tell my friend that? And if I tell my friend that, are they going to look at me differently? When we're building healthy communities, we need to see that our leaders are very transparent with us about their experiences. Personally, when I see a governor or I see a mayor running for office, who do I feel a deeper connection to? The person who's had a pretty privileged life, that's white, that's gone to the best schools, that won all the best medals, was on the debate team, etc. Or if I see someone of color who goes up there who maybe is, the son of immigrants or the son of a working class family of teachers, of nurses, or somebody that struggled and then got their way through it and is very transparent about how they made that happen, I'm more likely to trust that person. And if that person is giving me some pointers on what I should be doing in my life, for example, going to get my vaccine, going to town halls, the local town hall here in Sacramento is comprised of the wealthy white people in the community. I don't go there. I don't show up for that because I don't trust that those people are going to talk about things that are relevant to my family. And that's the bottom line. You rarely see people of color in town halls.
Right.
And the last part of this is to de-emphasize the de-emphasis on punishment and control. So one thing that we've been trying to do here is to emphasize more crisis management and intervention with professionals that are, trained in the mental health field than calling 911. Calling 911, many times you'll get paramedics, but the police almost always show up. And we all know what happens when the police show up. It usually escalates because people are afraid and they know what happens. They know how disproportionately violence gets turned on them by the police versus other people. So it's all about building relationships. And And then we'll go ahead and drill down and move to the next slide.
Okay.
You guys can still see that, right?
Yes, the friendship is key.
Yes. So
Great.
this is from Jasmine Guy. She says, the building of friendship, family, community, and love is complicated. We are so isolated in this country, no longer supported by tribes and villages. Black and brown communities, and I say that and I realize that's a big umbrella and it's much more, right. There's so much more to that than this giant monolith of color, so please forgive me. But we came from, and the Native American community here that we serve, came from small tribes and villages. And those were the social units that kept very close relationships, that made sure that their communities were healthy, had access to resources, and had access to the things they needed to survive. Right. Because we exist in this big country where the mechanisms of power are so unequal, a lot of us suffer from intergenerational trauma and an inability to navigate ourselves within that context, because we no longer have that small tribe or village that holds us up. When, you know, genetically and on a hereditary basis, we weren't born like that. So there's a lot of social isolation, and we have to really fight to maintain our friendships. So continuing, actually, I'll go ahead and give you guys an example. Yeah. So one of the things that I do here, oftentimes a primary care physician will call me. We're all in the same building. If they receive a call that they're not really sure what to do with, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the medical condition. There is this one African-American patient who is very isolated. He has a cognitive disability. He does not have access to his parents because they live in Oakland, and he doesn't possess a driver's license. And there's no way for him to get transportation to see them. And because of COVID, he's been stuck in his group home. And the result of that has been that he is not able to go to the day program that he generally goes to, that provides him with support, where he can see his friends and where he can build some vocational skills. So what does he do? He calls his doctor every day. He calls his doctor every single day because he's isolated, he's lonely, and she's someone he can trust who knows him. So she calls. So my part in that is trying to find ways to keep him from being so isolated, because he's suffering from, you know, this deep loneliness that is a result of COVID, but also a result of our community being so fractured that we don't have systems in place to keep, you know, individuals like him that have special needs connected. So that's a big piece of it that I think is lacking. So moving forward, we'll go to my last slide. Relationships that are healthy versus unhealthy. And I think this is something that most of us should connect with. Right. So a healthy relationship has trust. We've talked about building trust already with leadership. But it's also something that we develop with our friends, and it's really earned. It's not something you really get right away. It's something that's earned. You show up for the people in your life. Right. Versus an unhealthy relationship, which fuels fear. If you find that you are afraid to call somebody, to call a friend, to call a partner, that's usually a major red flag that there's something wrong. In healthy relationships, it's supportive and it's not controlling. So you have your own agency and autonomy within your relationship, because that person is encouraging you to grow, and they're not violating your boundaries. One of the biggest things that I see here that's discussed in therapy is that people feel like, I want to go to college, I want to do this, I want to do that, but my boyfriend won't let me, or I'm afraid that he'll get mad at me. That's a form of control. And if somebody loves and appreciates you, they're not going to need to control you because they love you and accept you enough to want you to reach your full potential.
Thank you for pointing that out, because a lot of people, I feel like, don't realize that control isn't always, physical or violent.
Absolutely. The other thing too that's not mentioned here is that the ability of a person to control you has nothing to do with your level of intellect. So often, I'll use women as an example. You'll see women who will talk about when they've, experienced domestic abuse. And oftentimes it'll be that the guy never hit her. But he did abuse her in many other ways. He controlled her life. And usually it just creeps up on a person and they'll say things like, I can't believe I have a college degree. I'm too smart for this. There's actually no correlation between your level of intellect and your ability to, or your propensity for abuse, because it can really spring up on you that easily.
Right.
The other thing in a healthy relationship is that you should be able to tell a significant other when something isn't okay. So there isn't a fear of conflict. Conflict is supposed to be a source of growth, not a source of punishment. Like, I'm not going to tell him that I don't like when he does this because I'm afraid of how he'll respond, is generally a major sign of abuse.
Right.
The other part that I want to emphasize on the bottom of the left-hand square is that it doesn't try to change the other person. Sometimes people who will abuse will say, well, if you just acted like this or you just did that, I would be nicer to you. A big part of that means, again, that the person is trying to control you.
Right.
Usually that'll be in the form of gaslighting, which I'm sure is something a lot of us have heard. Gaslighting meaning that we have a tendency, the abuser will tend to make you feel like you're the person who's crazy or that you're wrong for having your emotions or your feelings about something, and try to turn that on you. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. Go back to, okay. Are you still seeing my screen? I just want to make sure.
Oh, no, it's just you.
Okay, great. So part of what I know, I'm already coming up on time, I want to emphasize is that in order for us to build healthy relationships within communities, there really has to be a sense of connectedness. We have to continue to join summits like this so that we can stay connected to each other, so that we can communicate. Also, if you're in an abusive relationship, but you continue to be connected on forums like this in whatever way that's safe for you, the chances of you breaking that relationship and being safe and being able to get away from that type of abuse is more likely because you're not as isolated. And generally speaking, those are the people that go on to be community leaders or people that have survived a significant trauma and were able to come out of it. And those are the people that we really need to see in terms of leadership. So I know that was like a really fast view of like a real macro level social determinant down to friendships. I kind of had to smush it all together. But I have a couple of minutes if people have questions. I do want to tell people that in most areas, I know in Sacramento, there are domestic violence shelters, and more community health centers like mine have ways that you can tell people that something is going on without directly saying, hey, I'm being abused. There are screening forms. Again, I recommend if you go to the doctor with a friend. I partner with an embedded advocate we have from a nonprofit agency called Weave, which provides services to women, not just women, also men, anyone who reports domestic violence. where they will come up with a plan for you to get you safe and to go into a safe house where you can go. You can bring your children, you can bring
Mhm.
your pets, and they come
Wow.
up with a safety plan for you. So that's part of what we do, but we really need to figure out how to build community in positive ways that
Mhm.
combat the amount of racial disparity that communities of color experience. So,
I want to thank you again so much, Dottie, for offering your perspective and your knowledge on how we can build community and tribes again.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, and then for our next half hour, we're going to be bringing in Taylor Bass. Taylor is a holistic health and wellness educator. She works for Exceptional Wellness, Inc. She's also a life coach and a yoga instructor down in Houston, Texas. She supports her clients in cultivating self-awareness, personal responsibility, and physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual growth. Thanks. Hi, Taylor. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Bass, and as Jessica said, I am a health and wellness educator and life coach. And my goal is to help people reach their fullest potential to become the best versions of themselves through nurturing their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And so I'm coming here today to provide you with some tools that will help you, that you can use anytime after tense situations, whether that be at work or at home, with your family, or out in the community. So too often when something stressful happens, we tend to react as opposed to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe you've said something that you didn't mean, or you acted impulsively, making a choice that later you wish that you hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't always our best selves when we're feeling angry or triggered or anxious or overwhelmed.
Right.
So the best thing to do in these situations is to pause and take a breath. That's the first step to learn how to respond as opposed to react.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, would you mind giving us an example of like the difference between reacting and responding, maybe?
Sure. So let's say that you are in an argument and someone says something that upsets you, and your
Mm-hmm.
immediate response, it could be a trauma response, it could be something from your childhood that it bubbles up, and so immediately you're defensive, or
Mm-hmm.
you call them a name or something, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, well, in that case, just don't talk to me at all, or whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not beneficial, it's not helpful for the situation, but it's something that sometimes just comes out because we feel attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that situation, rather than responding in that way, which
Mm-hmm.
might just make the other person more upset, which might just leave you both feeling unfulfilled in whatever the issue was, take a moment, pause, take a breath, try to recognize what emotion you're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
what trigger that the comment kind of poked, and maybe it's, a feeling of abandonment or a feeling of
Mm-hmm.
not being seen or understood.
Right.
And so if you can name that, it's helpful to then choose your response wisely. um, And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to help us practice mindfulness. And mindfulness has kind of been a buzzword in the
Mm-hmm.
past few years. And so in case you don't know what it is, it basically at its simplest just means to be fully aware of the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
not anxious about the future, not ruminating about the past,
Mm-hmm.
not daydreaming or dissociating, trying to escape from what's going on, but really sitting in the here and now and feeling your emotions, feeling your sensations,
Mhm.
thinking your thoughts without trying to escape them.
Mhm.
So the easiest way to practice mindfulness is to start by focusing on the breath.
Okay.
Breathing is the basic mechanism that keeps us alive. And
Mhm.
when we are in a stressful situation, the sympathetic nervous system activates our fight or flight response.
Mhm.
So our brain releases adrenaline, our heart rate gets up, our blood pressure goes up.
Right.
The lungs, actually, the bronchioles in the lungs expand so that more oxygen can get in your lungs to go to your brain. Um, uh, Energy is released in your body so that in a life or death situation, you have what you need to save your life, save someone
Mhm.
else's life, do whatever you need to do to keep yourself alive in a
Right.
dangerous situation. Um, this is very helpful evolutionarily, but
Right.
often we're not often being chased by a bear or
Right.
a situation, or being about to be hit by a car. So
Right.
sometimes our body responds in a way where it's extra stressed, but it's not in line with what the situation is. So if you are in an argument like we discussed earlier, or
Mhm.
you got negative criticism at work, or
Yeah.
you are just feeling overwhelmed by housework and car problems, and you have just this heightened level of stress,
Mhm.
that's not helpful long term.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to learn how to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is essentially putting the brakes on that stress response.
Mhm.
And so, um, when you when I think about the parasympathetic nervous system, I think of it, some people call it the rest and digest response.
Okay.
So it's kind of your body just focusing on what it needs to do to stay alive without
Mhm.
added adrenaline, added effects.
Okay.
And so today I'm going to teach you a couple of ways that you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system,
Okay.
so that when you are feeling stressed or overwhelmed or anxious, you can use these tools to reintroduce calm, reintroduce peace, um, lower your heart rate, lower your blood pressure. And the best way to start with that is by focusing on your breathing.
Okay.
Um, and so, one thing that I do want to point out is that a lot of times in society, when we are breathing, we tend
Mhm.
to kind of suck in. Where
Mhm.
there's society is very fat phobic. We all want to look really thin,
Mhm.
and so we walk around all day
Right.
sucking in our stomachs.
Right.
Um, and that's not how we get the best oxygen. That's not
Right.
how we nourish our bodies.
Mhm.
So for this exercise, I will ask you all to focus on when you breathe in, allow your belly to expand. Um,
Mhm.
so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to practice diaphragmic breathing. And what
Okay.
that means is that most of the time when we breathe, our breath is pretty shallow. We just kind of
Mhm.
breathe in, breathe out, and our chest rises a little bit, but we're not fully experiencing the full capacity of our lungs.
Mhm.
And so, what diaphragmatic breathing is your diaphragm is underneath your lungs, and when you take a large, deep breath,
Mhm.
your diaphragm expands.
Okay.
It pulls down in your stomach, which allows for your lungs to have more room to expand as well.
Mhm.
Um, and so when you take this big, deep breath, um, it activates the vagal nerve and it helps you to calm your body. So the
Okay.
first thing we're going to do is called a square breath.
Okay.
Um, it is fairly simple. It's called a square breath because it has four equal parts.
Okay.
So first we will breathe in for 4 counts. You'll hold it at the top for four
Mhm.
counts. You'll breathe out for 4 counts and then hold it at the bottom for 4 counts.
Okay.
Alrighty. So place your right hand on your heart and your left hand on your belly. Make sure
Okay.
that when you breathe in, your belly is expanding. Alrighty. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Again. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. So this is a quick and easy breath that you can take anytime, anywhere. You can do it sitting at a stoplight, on your drive home. You can do it, just do a quick square. If you're in an argument, like, hold on, let me take a breath before I say something I don't mean. It's just a really quick and easy way to kind of gather yourself in a moment of tension.
Right. And in anyone that might be skeptical, I just did it and I feel like super relaxed.
Awesome. I love it. So in addition to increasing our oxygen intake, the next big thing about mindfulness is observation. So I will invite you to breathe with me again. This time, I want you to close your eyes, and we're not going to count. We're not going to hold. I just want you to inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth, and pay attention to how it feels in your body. Okay. So as we inhale, just inhale as comfortably as you can. It doesn't have to be too deep. Feel your chest rise. Feel the coolness of the breath as it hits the back of your throat. Maybe you notice that it feels cooler as you inhale and warmer as you exhale. As I inhale, I'm noticing kind of a sensation in my ears.
Yeah, I'm noticing like a tickling in the back of my throat.
Yeah. And that's something like when you're going about your normal day, you're not thinking about these sensations. But mindfulness is all about kind of, okay, let's not think about what's going on outside of us. Let's focus on me. Let's focus on what I'm feeling. And so you start to notice things that you maybe didn't notice before.
Right.
So take a moment to further relax.
Okay.
Unclench your jaw. Lower your shoulders down from your ears. Maybe shake your body a little bit. Feel yourself inside of your body. And you can bring your attention to your hands. Maybe they're still on your heart and your belly, or maybe you rest them on your knees. Really pay attention to the sensation of your fingertips on your chest or your knees or wherever they're resting. Now think about any smells in the room. Maybe there's some fresh laundry, or maybe you can still smell what someone microwaved for lunch. What does your skin feel like? Is there a fan in the room that you can feel the air blowing? Are you sweating? Can you taste anything? Maybe it's just the taste of your saliva, or maybe you had something really great for lunch and you can still taste it. Maybe you can even imagine what you want to eat for dinner and you can taste it on the tip of your tongue. What do you hear? I hear the fan above me in the room. I hear the hum of the air conditioning. I hear the sound of my hands rubbing against my pants. Maybe you hear the sound of your breath. So this technique is called grounding. So anytime that you are in a situation where you feel anxiety or stress, you can take a moment to focus on your five senses: what you taste, what you smell, what you feel, what you see, what you hear. And that will help you bring yourself back into your body, connecting with yourself, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering your heart rate, slowing your breathing, bringing you back to calm. All right. My next technique is called body scanning. You're welcome to keep your eyes closed or you can open them. This technique works by bringing your attention to your physical body. So similar to the grounding where we focused on our senses, that's partially our body, partially our surroundings. This time we're going to focus on creating sensations within our body. So I invite you to close your eyes and bring your attention to your head. You can start by furrowing your brow or your forehead. Squint your eyes. Flare your nose. If you can, wiggle your ears. Open and close your mouth. Roll your neck from side to side. Now bring your attention to your shoulders. You can raise them, and as you lift them up, feel the tension in your back. You can go up and down, or you can go up and just hold. That feels really nice for me right now. Now you can bring your attention to your arms. You can flex your biceps. You can do them at the same time or one at a time. Roll your wrists. Now you can spread your fingers wide and alternate between wide fingers and fists. Moving on to your chest. If you want to place your hands on your heart again, you can breathe normally, or you could breathe deeply and just feel the rise and fall of your chest. And then moving to your belly, you can feel, keep breathing, just feel the rise and fall of your abdomen. Bring your attention to your back. Try to sit up as straight as you can. I like to place my hands on my knees and kind of pull back so that my chest comes forward. And now we'll move on to the legs. Depending on how you're sitting, this could be different for each of you. I like to squeeze my glutes. You can do them at the same time or one and then the other. If your legs are straight, you could try lifting your kneecaps to tighten your quads. And finally, we'll move to your feet. You can flex them and point them. You can roll your ankles, curl your toes. And recognize that for the past 5 minutes or so, you have been completely in your body. When you draw your attention to your physical body, you become more in tune with yourself, and you place a barrier between yourself and any external stimuli that may have been causing you stress. And then my last technique, we're running short on time, but for the last technique, it is visualization. This technique can be a little harder for some people, but if you keep practicing it, you get better at it. And so visualization calls for you to focus on, use your imagination. So it's good for when you have a little bit of extra time. The activities that we've been doing, you can do pretty quickly whenever during the day. I like to use visualization at night, kind of after work. I usually like to lie down when I'm doing it, but you can do it sitting up as well. So once again, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes and go on a little quick journey with me. So imagine yourself outside on a nice day. The sun is shining, but it's not too hot or humid. The sky is blue. There's a slight breeze and the air smells crisp. Your vision won't look like anyone else's because you're going to your happy place. That could be on the beach, listening to the waves. It could be a secluded meadow, or lying out by the pool, or at the top of a mountain. Your place can be a place you can do visit a lot, or it could be just an ideal place in your imagination. Wherever your place may be, I invite you to take a seat. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel the air on your skin. Feel the sunshine on the top of your head, on your face, on the back of your neck. Listen to the birds, or the waves, or the swishing of the grass. Really set the scene and add any details that you like. Maybe your dog is resting its head on your lap. Maybe you smell your favorite flowers nearby. But when you're in this place, nothing else matters. Not the workday, not what's for dinner, not what bills are due. When you are here, there is nothing expected of you. Your only objective is to just be. Unfurrow your brow, rest your jaw, unsuck your stomach, and let the weight of the world sink out through your seat. Perhaps you are able to have a free and clear mind. That's really difficult for some people, and that's okay. If you notice that you're feeling emotions about something that happened yesterday, or thoughts about what needs to be done this evening, that's okay. Don't judge yourself for it. Just redirect and try to bring yourself back to your surroundings. As you've been relaxing, a cloud has appeared. You didn't notice because your eyes were closed and you were in tune with yourself. Slowly, it starts to rain. And as the rain hits your skin, you start to feel lighter as all the stresses and worries of today begin to wash away. As you breathe in, you smell the rain. And as you breathe out, you release your tension. As the rain stops, you feel relief. The cloud floats away, revealing the sun again. The warmth returns and dries your skin. You feel the sun's warmth on your face, and without a doubt, you have a feeling that you are loved, you are important, you are worthy, and you matter. At this moment, you are safe and you are secure. Sit with this feeling. I want you to know that you can revisit this place and this feeling anytime that you need a reprieve. As I invite you to reorient yourself and join me in the present moment, wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, roll your shoulders, take a big stretch. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and join me back here. Alrighty, so I want to thank everybody for joining me today and learning these skills. I hope that you are able to take them with you and use them in everyday situations. And if you would like to follow me, my full name is up here, Taylor Elaine Bass. So on Instagram, that is my handle, Taylor Elaine Bass. And on Twitter, it's just Taylor Elaine, my first and middle name. So thank you.
All right. I want to thank you again so much, Taylor, for the soothing exercises.
Absolutely.
Like, do you even know who you are? Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Give you something, you ain't know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something you never ever heard. Might unlearn what you used to did learn. Might get real, it might get served. Might slip up and say the N-word. Yeah, Ace, real great. Hope you tune in, cause we can't wait. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Give you something, you know you want it. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Hello. Can you guys hear me? Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, wait.
Hi.
Yeah.
I see Chris.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now I hear
There we
y'all.
go. Thank you. I'm so excited for this panel. I am so excited to talk to you all today. I am going to introduce the panel very quickly. We have our divestment movement panel here. Over the last year, a movement called the divestment movement has gained a lot of traction amongst cisgendered Black women. This movement calls into question the treatment of Black women as they call for Black women to date people who cherish them. Speak to leaders in this movement, like the Pink Pill we have here, as well as fellow authors about unpacking what divestment means to them, their feelings around the topic, and the potential impact it will have on Black America. I am going to introduce our three phenomenal panelists. We have Dr. Diane Stewart. Diane is a professor of religion and African American studies at Emory University, specializing in African heritage religious cultures in the Caribbean and Americas. Stewart's research has been supported by the Fulbright Scholars Program, the Bill and Carol Fox Center for Humanistic Inquiry, and the American Academy of Religion. And she has a book called The Black Woman, Black Love, America's War on African American Marriage. We also have Dr. Cheryl Judas. Cheryl holds a PhD in sociology from Northwestern University, where she is an adjunct faculty member in the School of Education and Social Policy. Her research focuses on the intersections of race, class, and gender. In her book, Interracial Marriages Between Black Women and White Men, which was published in 2008, was her first academic text published on the experiences of Black women in interracial marriages. Her latest book, Interracial Relationships Between Black Women and White Men, focuses on the experiences of Black women who are dating, married to, or divorced from white men. Additionally, she's interviewed white men on why they prefer to date or marry Black women. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today, so I'm very excited about that. And then we have Kristlyn Kerrison. Kristlyn is the co-author of Swirling: How to Date, Mate, and Relate, Mixing Race, Culture, and Creed. She's a brand ambassador for interracialdatingscentral.com, a publisher of the blog beyondblackwhite.com, a columnist for EURweb.com, sorry, and a social media personality. You all probably know her from The Pink Pill, and she has relayed her formal etiquette and protocol training to create a unique online self-improvement course called The Pink Pill, made with especially the Black woman in mind. Thank you all for joining me today. I am so excited to talk to you all. As you all have, you can probably see, y'all have very different takes on this topic. So I think that we'll have a really rich conversation today. Y'all are all so knowledgeable. So our umbrella question that we posed to y'all was, how do you define the divestment movement? And so to me, one of the true leaders of this movement, as being like started on YouTube, is Crystalline with The Pink Pill. So if it's okay, I would like to pass this to you first to answer, how do you define the divestment movement?
Thank you so much. And it's so nice to see familiar faces. Hello, Cheryl. Hi, Dr. Stewart. Both familiar with them both. Wonderful, lovely ladies. So the divestment movement means different things to different people, but essentially what it means is to start asking questions about the status quo and also to withdraw from things, from fights, from people, from situations, from relationships that do not serve us. These conversations started happening as early as 2009 online. And in those early days, it was actually very, very dangerous for Black women to have these conversations, and taboo to start asking questions about the way in which Black women are treated within the community, the way in which the relationships dynamics differ a lot from other relationships of other races, how the expectations of Black women should not be similar to expectations that women of other races have, the idea that Black women are supposed to do everything, to bear all. One of the funniest is that men believe that Black women should raise them up and build them up, and basically, we need to train them to be our bosses. So we started asking the question, well, if I'm training you to be a boss, why am I not just the boss?
Right.
So we're asking those really important questions because even to this day, many years later, still in 2021, we're still asking the question, cui bono, who benefits from Black women putting so much time, energy, and sacrifice in a community that doesn't seem to reciprocate that type of dedication?
And then Dr. Stewart, how do you define the divestment movement?
Well, I'm certainly not finding it. I can tell you, I'm finding it. I'm still learning about it. And based on what I've read and what I've learned, I think it could be a very important movement. I think just like Crystalline said, it seems as if it means different things to different people. But if divestment has to do with Black women privileging themselves and working on care and making sure that they are not submitting themselves to toxic relationships and toxic arrangements that ultimately harm and even kill some Black women, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Now, there's some aspects, some things that I've heard and seen that I'm a little concerned about, because one of my concerns is longer term solutions that can help the community as a whole. And I understand that, individuals that are looking to date or marry are not looking for longer term solutions, but we still, as a community, I think, need to be thinking about those kinds of issues, right? So I would say I am a little concerned about some of the comments that I've heard or seen that raise questions about solidarity with Black men or lack of solidarity with Black men. I guess I'm concerned about what's happening with Black boys and how are we thinking about ways to raise Black boys and to cultivate in them a love for Black girls, Black women, Black people, such that some women that I'm hearing talking about divesting out there will not want to talk about divesting from Black men wholesale. You know, I am concerned about that issue as well.
Okay. And then Dr.
And when I
Judas.
say we, I mean all of us. By the way, when I say we, I mean all of us. I don't mean just Black women.
Yeah. And then Dr. Judas, how do you define the divestment movement?
Well, that's just it. I don't have any definition for it because until you sent me an email, I'd never heard of it. So maybe I'm an anachronism here, but from what I'm gathering from my other two colleagues here, if it's the idea that Black women should divest themselves from Black men, that would not be my message. And but again, I don't know anything more about that than that, so I don't want to comment further.
Okay. Well, I will say
I do have something that I can add for clarity. Is that okay?
yes, yes, please.
Yeah, so there is a lot of confusion about what divestment is. And since I was there from the beginning, I mean, I am not the originator of the divestment movement, but I was present when the early pioneers online were having these discussions. And based on that, I created an acronym for divest. So the D stands for disengage from things that do not serve you. So whatever that is, if it's a situation, if it's a relationship, if it's a job, if it's a neighborhood, whatever it is, disengage from things that do not serve you. The next one is I, and that is to inquire. Inquire cui bono, who benefits from what is being asked of you? And then ask cui mal, who is hurt, who loses? The V stands for vet and verify everyone. That means that you don't grade anyone on a curve. You have the same standard across the board for everybody you interact with, especially romantically, but also as in friendships and alliances. And that skin folk ain't necessarily kinfolk, and not every white person is the devil. E stands for everything is not your fight. I think that Black women in particular struggle with that, feeling like it's their responsibility to fight on every front of the Black experience. And what happens is it diminishes us, it drains us. We are not being filled up. We are not being filled up. We're being drained out. One of my colleagues, her name is Kola Booth. She said something very profound. She said, Black girls are the only flowers that are expected to grow without being fed, without being watered. And we are not, as a whole, watered. And this is not a slight to Dr. Stewart, but the issue that a lot of Black women have is something that you said, I'm concerned for the Black boys, but what about the Black girls? And so like when we have these conversations, when we have when thought pieces are created, when we're getting together for conventions and seminars, it is the boys and the men that seem to be at the forefront, and nobody is mentioning. It's like we're just these extra things, and being made to feel invisible, except for when you're needed, is something that is causing deep resentment with Black women. So everything is not your fight. S stands for self first. Self-love, self-respect. The T stands for tell others when they are ready, because not everybody is going to be ready to hear what divestment is all about. But though that is people may have other definitions, but that acronym is what I teach when I speak of divestment.
Could I just respond to the issue about the bullying? Yeah, in no way do I ever privilege Black boys over Black girls. I am responding to some of the things I heard based on the material that you shared with me, based on some of the things you told me about divestment, Riel. So I'm responding to particular things that I heard. Because many, no matter what, most Black women, I would for a long time, unless we become more of a mixed race society, most Black women are going to be looking for and wanting to marry Black men or partner with Black men. Many Black women who end up, maybe they already have children and they might end up marrying outside of the race, they might still have Black boys. So part of what I'm interested in is how do we heal, and not heal in a way that to be moles. And one of the ways I think we do is by getting Black men who are truly allies to step up and do some work, to actually be at the forefront of certain movements. I think we need to have Black men ones to step up and say, this is wrong. I think that needs to happen. But I don't want you to think in any way that I somehow am so worried about the boys and the men at the expense of women and girls. Not at all.
I would say that I feel like our culture does make us very vigilant about the Black male experience. I will very much use myself as an example. When I went to Wellesley, unfortunately, I was sexually assaulted by a Black man at MIT. I did not put him out there because I didn't want to get rid of a Black man at MIT. Like, it's such a rare experience, like, for them to be able to get to that level. Like, and when I talked to Black women around me at that time, all of them told me, like, we should talk to him, but you should, like, you can't take this away from him because it's so rare that Black men get to that point. And so it took a lot of years of me being in therapy to learn to not put Black men at the forethought of every fight or everything that what I want to better the community. The default for most Black women is to think about what's the impact for Black men. Yeah. What's the long-term impact on them?
Was he thinking about the impact it was going to have on you, a Black woman, when he sexually assaulted you? That's exactly the point. Like, we're so busy thinking about their futures, they don't care about ours. That creates monsters. When you can do things because you are appealing to somebody's better, more nurturing nature, they're nurturing the nurturing and protective instinct of women to excuse evil that is being done to you. This is why Black women are fed up with this. I mean, and I don't blame them. I think that's horrible that happened and that even has to be a discussion.
And I think for me, that's why I really want to have this panel, is because the divestment movement was the first time I started hearing Black women talk about centering ourselves and our experiences and our trauma and what we've been enduring over the last few decades, at least since the 70s, at least, if not before then, and the indoctrination that we give our young women of, like, how to be great women. But we don't tend to indoctrinate men around how to be great members of society, human beings, great men to people or women. It's a lot of emphasis around women. So I think like Crystalline, at first, when I heard you talk about the young Black boys, I was like, I rarely hear people say, what about the young Black girls, And I get it. And I actually understand what your comment was, but I had that, like, knee-jerk reaction of, like, but the girls, we always go straight to the boys and what their impact is. And right now, the divestment movement is calling for us to think of ourselves perhaps first and be a little bit selfish with our self-love and what we need for us to grow, and perhaps healing ourselves before we try to heal the community and other members of the community. But that's me testifying, and I'm a moderator, so I just wanted to put that out there. But that kind of leads to my first question of, how do you think the idea of Black love might have changed over time? I grew up in the 90s where it was all about the ride or die chick. I don't know if there are other things before that, or, what do you think, how has Black love kind of changed over time? And anybody can pick this.
I've got plenty to say, but I don't want to take up the whole thing because I have plenty to say, but,
Yeah, just the concept of Black love.
Well, I think that from a Black woman's perspective, and this is to Dr. Stewart's point, Black love, where you meet the IBM, the ideal Black man, that's the Black girl's Cinderella story. That's what we've sort of been cultivated to want. It's and it's natural to want that. It's something that I wanted personally before I had to make some different decisions. So it's something that it's our Cinderella story, and we still cling to it so much, not only just because it's a natural thing, but also because it's fed to us. It's fed to us as like an ideal. And the fact that, and Dr. Justice would probably speak to this as well, there's a massive shortage when it comes to marriageable Black women than there is to Black men. And it creates this huge imbalance of what is a reasonable amount of time to start talking marriage. And what we have now is we have the lowest marriage rates of all races. And men, I believe, Black men marry at, I think, 42%. And of that 42%, 24% of them intermarry. And when they have an advanced degree, it goes up to 30%, even sometimes 40%. Black men who make over $100,000 are less likely to marry, while other races of men are more likely to marry when they reach that threshold. We've got a huge out of wedlock rate. So we've got issues of colorism. The fact that it has been actually, there is documentation from Black male sociologists that says the light-skinned biracial Black women get married first. So we're dealing with all of this stuff, still trying to have Black love. What is that going to do in terms of the relationship marketplace? I was just on Clubhouse yesterday, and he was a nice boy, 32 years old, was in aerospace, was an aerospace engineer, did well. And he just said, and he was like, I'm just not going to settle. I don't need to settle. She needs to prove to me that she's, worthy of me. And it was like, well, what's your ideal woman? Oh, he gave some Rihanna, he gave a reference to that. He's like, oh, I want her to have curly hair. And I'm like, well, what kind of curly hair? What do you mean? The kind you can braid and stuff. I said, so you mean like loose curly hair? Yeah, like that. I'm like, oh, so you want a light-skinned, biracial looking or mixed Black woman. And she's got to do wifey tryouts. She got to hop on one leg,
at least for 3 years,
pat her tummy, pat her head, all at the same time, and then maybe you'll think about it. And then I've had other conversations with men who said, a man actually said this, and he's a celebrity. I said, so in a world where everything was wonderful and every Black man could be with every Black woman, there'd be still 2 million Black women unmarried. What are those women supposed to do? And he said, well, they should stay behind and help raise the next generation. It is just, there is no empathy. There is no compassion. It's just, this is what you need to do for me. I need for you to do this. I need for you to do that. And like, to me, a lot of Black girls are saying that Black love is #struggle love. And they really just don't want it, because it sounds a lot like that. Because if you're fighting tooth and nail for the men who are, at the top, or you're going to have to settle, which it looks like we do. 80% of Black women are heads of household. I just read somewhere that 4 million households are completely dependent on Black women to survive. Without them, they would be desolate and destitute. We clearly are needed in this community, but a lot of us don't feel needed. A lot of us don't feel appreciated, and a lot of us don't feel loved. And, it's one of those, we're sick and tired and we're not taking anymore. What was that movie?
Diane or Cheryl, do you have anything in response or thoughts about the...
I have a lot, but I would love for Cheryl, Dr. Judas, to respond first.
Well, the first thing I want to respond is that, Crystalline, that colorism problem goes right back to slavery. The history of this country has been built on colorism, and not just in the United States and not just with African Americans. Virtually every other group of color still still rates themselves, or the women, based on how closely they approximate whiteness. That happens in Asian cultures, big time, in Hispanic cultures. Again, because we live in a society or a world where white skin is privileged. That's just the way it is. So I can't blame Black men for feeling that way, because how else are they going to feel? That's the only message that the society has put forth forever. So in my generation, of course, you're totally spot on. Being fair skinned, close to approximate whiteness, supposedly the greater your dating advantages. Our Spike Lee showed that in a movie now that's quite old. School Days. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I don't fault Black men for preferring fair skin, because that is all they see. And it's only in recent times that you're getting commercials and you're talking to somebody that doesn't watch television. So I just, whenever I get a snatch, every now and then we get someone that's darker skinned in a commercial where we are extolling them as being desirable and feminine. And then
Can I ask a question? Sorry. Why do Black women still think dark-skinned men are attractive, and we can still find value in them? But because we see white men as big, like,
right.
Asian men are kind of higher than white men.
All over the internet. Black men are all over the internet saying they want a dark chocolate, dark-skinned man.
Well,
yeah, like, why don't we have that same kind of mentality that they have around colorism? Like, when we look at men.
Riel, I do think that there are a lot of Black women who also struggle with and suffer from colorism. Let's not act like that doesn't exist.
Right.
It's very, very prominent in terms of how we view our own features, and in terms of what our ideal is for marrying, for having children. So that's still there. I do think, and it's funny because as Cheryl was talking, I mean, we know about those eras of the paper bag test, but it's funny, I've been reflecting a lot. And I really do think the era, I mean, I grew up in a Black working class neighborhood, and Black boys, Black teenagers liked Black girls. That's who they liked. They didn't like white girls. They liked Black girls. So I keep reflecting on, at least in my neighborhood where I grew up, I keep reflecting on where is this coming from? And I personally think there was a huge shift with the rise of MTV, with the rise of video television, because that's where the racially ambiguous teenage Black woman with the loose curl hair pattern began to become inundating our TVs, across the board. And I do think that it raises questions, because to me, these are our brothers. These are our fathers, our sons, our nephews. I mean, don't we care about how they think or how they're going to think in the future? For me, I'm interested in some long-term solutions. I'm not against anyone who wants to date anyone. I don't have any issue. Love is hard enough. I have nothing to say about anybody who finds love anywhere. I just hope it's love. I just really hope it's love. Right? So I'm okay with that. I don't promote personally. I don't promote interracial dating. But I am not against it. I would never say anything about anyone who dates interracially. My question is, when are we going to look at how many of the traumas we're experiencing with one another are related to broader systemic and structural issues? If we want more Black men to show up for their kids, I bet you they would, if they really, more would. I'm not saying everyone would, but I bet you many more would if they weren't under-resourced, if they weren't dealing with mass incarceration, if they weren't dealing with lack of opportunities, or they weren't dealing with your zip code determining your future, if they weren't dealing with 10 generations of wealth stolen from them, if they weren't, I mean, we can go on. We can go on. I mean, I listened to someone today who said she had 12 things that Black women could do to divest. And of those 12 things, it's all about making yourself elite and educating yourself and socializing yourself to, be able to drink wine with the rich and famous or whatever it might be. But all of those 12 things require systemic change for most Black women. Where money from? How much they save? Where are they actually going to get that money to be able to do the traveling that she's literally saying? Stop spending money on things that are frivolous, that don't matter, so that you can save your money to get out of a poor neighborhood. Where are poor Black women ever going to get the money to do the kinds of things that she was, recommending? And so I am more. It's almost as if my work is more long term and saying, as we divest, and I'm all for it. Because I'm all for all different kinds of approaches to any kind of issue. We need very, very radical approaches that are taking no prisoners. There's no joke about it. What Lynn Mapai, the womanist scholar, calls the flyover approach. I'm not dealing with this. I'm flying right over this institution that's dogging me. We also need people who are willing to go into the institution and work with it. I believe that we need both kinds of approaches, right? So I'm all for divestment. Whoever needs should, and to whatever degree they feel they need to, right? But what I'm not for is Black men are. I know many Black men who love Black women and are married to Black women. It's not enough. It's not nearly enough. But sometimes in these conversations, that gets lost. It's almost like a no hope for. And I'm saying these are our brothers. These are our nephews. I have never allowed myself to suffer from toxicity with any Black man. That's why I've been married several times until I found the right one. I will not allow that. So in saying this, I don't want you to think in any way that I would ever encourage a Black woman to in any way sacrifice herself and her health and her well-being for someone else. I just feel like this is our community, isn't it? Aren't these our nephews, our brothers? We need an approach that also, how would I put it, almost compels more of them to come along. And I think that involves other Black men who see it, who get it, and who need to step up.
And they also need to stop thinking that Black women are going to be a foregone conclusion as their soft place to fall. I'm going to be just honest with you. That's what Ralph Richard Banks said. He said, you know what, Black women really do need to withdraw that no matter what, I'm going to be with you. Part of the reason why there's no impetus to change is because it hasn't gotten uncomfortable enough. I've had men actually say, yes, I know Black women, don't always treat Black women well. But I love Black women. And a colleague of mine, Kendall St. Charles, she's very popular in this space as well. She said, well, if you love Black women and you understand that you need them and you want them, why do some of you treat them the way that you do? And he said, he got quiet for a second and he said, you know what? To be honest with you, it's because we know you're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. If I can jump in here a minute, one of the things that I always find interesting, and one thing that as Black women and mothers we share with Jewish culture, is that with all the systemic racism that has gone on through the generations, we love our sons and we raise our daughters.
Yes.
And that is a bit of a problem, because if we are the main parent for most of these children, then we need to make certain that both genders are getting a message of being someone and becoming someone. And we shouldn't privilege the male over the female, because subtly we're letting the man think that, you really are going to have it better than your sister. The son, again, you're going to have it better than your sister. And that's just not a good message at all. But again, it goes back to that. And I understand the genesis for that. Black women have always tried to be more protective of Black men just because of the history of racism in this country and so on. But again, it's gotten to the point where it's harmful. I've begun to see changes in the choice and the selection patterns of Black men with the rise of the civil rights movement. When that movie came out in 1967, that, Sidney Poitier was with this white woman and so on and so forth. And here comes a law in 1967 that eliminated any bans against marrying interracially. And it coincided with some of the rise in educational aspirations for African Americans, period. And as they became more educated and more integrated into the larger white society, it's only natural that the men, at least, are going to feel that, they want what the white man has. And if we have put white women as the one that is the preeminent example of femininity, we can't really blame them. So that was some of the outgrowth of the civil rights movement that may not be something we want to, talk too much about it. Prior to that time period, when we were living in less integrated societies, you found people marrying right within their community, and because that's who they knew. But as their world expanded, so too did their opportunities and their aspirations. Okay, so now I can make this $100,000. I want what $100,000 buy. Well, it buy me this nice white woman, or just one more thing. The other thing is the flip side. I have to tell you, among some of my interviewees, I have met several Black men who have married white women whose families have been pretty well off financially, and who have taken this Black man and have put him in a position where he actually does have more wealth than he would have had he married a typical Black woman. So he has seen the advantage to marrying outside the race, because this white woman's father is certainly not going to let her live less than. And so where he has the ability to do so, he pulls them all along. So that's a real tough lure, particularly if you have a Black man that's gone to the elite university, and maybe that little open door to allow him access into a world that he might not have been able to get to on his own. Yeah, he weighs that against, should I marry the good sister over here? So there are all these little nuances that come out that, are kind of icky, but at the same time, we want to acknowledge them for what they are when they.
You're definitely speaking to my experience growing up in Decatur, where it's greater, mostly Black, and I went to prep schools, and I saw a lot of young boys come from militant families, and once their world opened up, from then on out, they only dated white women. And to this day, most of them have married white, and even my friends from college too. So I have personally experienced the world opening up and then them divesting without calling it that. What are you going to say, Crystalline?
I was going to say, it sounds like Black men divested a long time ago. We're sitting up here wringing our hands because Black women are doing it. But Cheryl, you said for the last 5 minutes how Black men have divested. And I would even go even further. 18 years after the Civil War was the first Supreme Court appeal for a Black man to marry a white woman. Wow. So as soon as they could, that's what they did. So it's very interesting that the hand wringing for the divestment movement now, because we have a name for it, but the men have been doing it. They've just been doing it.
Yeah.
And I do want to say though, once again, some men have been doing it. Because honestly,
enough for all of us to notice. Enough for all of us to notice.
Well, let me say this: the way I hear the conversation, I was actually shocked that nationally it's only 24% that marry outside of the race, and so that's not just white women, but outside of the race. I really expected it to be much higher, because well, I was writing my book for all Black women. I wasn't writing it for just upper class or upper middle class Black women. So I really did expect it to be much higher nationally. And so I do want to say that it's some Black men. It's not all Black men.
Do you think it's because, and Cheryl brought this up before around like where we live and stuff like that, do you think it's because of our history of redlining where we aren't really integrated in most communities? So like a lot of places, unless they are encountering white, Latina, Asian women, they like we said earlier, like whoever's in their community, if you're in an all Black community, you only see all Black people and you are dating. So then, you're going to date a Black woman or a light skinned woman because in your mind that's closer to white. But then when I leave that community, maybe if I'm in a more still poor, but mixed poor community, maybe I'm going to start like the WeTV shows. I'm going to start dating some of the, more humble white women, so I don't know if that's like because of our history of redlining and we're not really integrated as a country, and so there's less opportunities for like the majority of Black men to really meet these women and date them and marry them, or is it because the 80% really wholeheartedly want to date and marry Black women, and if they were in a mixed area they still would marry Black women? Like, I don't know if I'm convinced that they would if they were in a mixed opportunity.
Well, I don't know. Nobody is chaining Black men anywhere. I mean, we pretty much can see white people, wherever we live in America, wherever we work with white people, so I do think a good number of Black men want to marry Black women. I mean, I think, as Crystalline said, it's natural, it's within your culture, I do think so, but I do think, as Cheryl said, that there are so many social, economic, cultural factors that persuade, that compel, that really make white womanhood desirable for Black men, that privilege it, that put it at the apex of beauty and desirability. So I think, we're always going to get some that would do that. I think one of the things that concerns me, is the all or nothing. That does concern me, but also, trying to get at the bottom of why, do Black men really desire us, or do Black men not desire us? I mean, my question is, why are they trying to compete with these white men? And I think that one of the things that we really have to look at is the underlying foundation of patriarchy and patriarchal social arrangements that impact how we raise one another, especially as it manifests in religious communities, right? How we're raised, how we relate to one another, our expectations of one another, our disappointment with one another, our competition with one another. If you ask me, I think it really a foundational factor that is very much implicated in this issue is patriarchy. How marriage is constructed, how men compete within patriarchy for certain kinds of resources. I think, and I'm not a fan of patriarchy. I can just tell you that. I'm not a fan of it at all. Yeah, I don't believe that Black men or any men should be heads of households. I don't even like the title head of household. I basically say we need to dispense with that. We need adults to take on adult responsibilities and to share those responsibilities. And we need to empower the entire kinship group. And that aligns with many of our Africana kinship, African heritage kinship structures. Some of them we continue to practice, and many of them have been demonized. But I think we need to be much more flexible in how we understand marriage and household and family. So I think that has a lot to do with it, and religion plays a strong role in that as well.
And Cheryl, I feel like you want to say something.
Once again, patriarchy is a part of this culture that we live in. And so Black men, they want to make certain that they feel that they are equal to any white man. So it would be a much harder sell to say, hey, you all don't have to carry on like that at all, because we're interested in equality and so on and so forth. But again, generally speaking, you have to look at what's going on in the broader culture. And in the broader culture, in the United States, patriarchy is still there. Now, at least it's there in theory. Whether it actually is that way, in fact, is a different discussion. But again, that's what, men, they want their woman to look up to them. And so that's something that's very important to acknowledge.
Well, I noticed we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the men and their psychology. And I really wanted this to be about Black women and what we're thinking about for ourselves. So I know that you all have looked at interracial dating and the success rates and all that. From what you've researched and found, what do you feel like the difference is for the Black woman when she dates interracially? I think most of y'all have looked at white men and Black women versus when the Black woman dates Black men.
Well, I can jump right into that one, because the one thing that I found so interesting is that when a Black woman finds a partner outside of the race, she applies the same standards to that partner as any white woman would apply to dating anyone. It is only when Black women date within the race that they, to the degree that some will do, they will compromise their values for who they want.
That's it.
And that's what, it just cracks me up. I said, as soon as they go outside the race, they know what standard they should
be. Right. They're like, they got a checklist.
They know.
Because you got to prove it to your girlfriends that I'm dating this white guy, so he has all this stuff. He's okay. He's cool.
But within the race, within the race, they're not nearly as harsh in the judgment. It just cracks me up. And then on the flip side, I have had, even since I published my book, I can't begin to tell you the number of Black women that when they have stepped outside of the race, and I'm talking about women in their 50s and, oh no, they're never going to do this. They have been stunned at how quickly the white male will want to be in a committed relationship, because they have just been so beaten down by this Black man that is taking them through all these different changes. He can't do this yet. He got to do this first. And then it's like they don't really know how to respond when someone treats them with the respect and the love they deserve. And I mean, this woman just entertained me. I just had no idea. I had to slow him down. I'm thinking, exactly why? You like him and he likes you.
He was nurturing me. He was loving. Oh no! Wait, hold on.
This is too much. It's like we know what we should have, but we only put that on the shelf when we try and bring in Black men, and that's not for all Black men. But again, generally speaking, Black women will change their standards. I won't say lower their standards. They will change their standards for a Black man. But heck no, when they're outside the race, they want just like it. They want the same standards any other woman would want.
That is the truth.
I'm telling you.
There's also just this level of suspicion. I feel like the community has done a very good job at making Black women be almost hyper vigilant if a non-Black man is interested. We're supposed to be looking for fetishization and racism under every nook and cranny, and it's like, it's so interesting. I was like, wow, everybody has all of this great advice for Black women. You mentioned that you want to open your options, and everybody's got some advice for you on what you should do. But if you want to date, like when we're talking about within the race, there's no advice, it's like nobody's saying, well, be careful of this. Well, your parents and stuff will, but nobody, like total strangers will, we'll be on Clubhouse and total strangers want to give people advice. And all of a sudden they knew this one white guy who, was his coworker at the Amazon distribution center. And he said that he likes to lock Black women in the closet. So you need to be careful. I mean, there's always this. And so I feel like Black women, we are more hyper vigilant because we're taught to be, but we don't have that same energy is not put towards being vigilant. And that's where the V comes for vetting everybody, vet Black men the way you vet white men. You know what I mean? Be scrutinizing of that Black man the same way you're scrutinizing of that white man.
And Diane, did you want to?
Well, I would just say I couldn't agree more. I think if there's nothing that pains me more than a woman allowing herself to be abused or taken for granted by a man, period. So I couldn't agree more. Vet them all. I don't think that concerns about racism or what are unfounded, but I say vet them all. It's interesting. Maybe it's in the public arena, but I mean, in my circles, we give one another a lot of advice about dating, whether it's Black or it's anything. We do that in my circles. So I don't know. I didn't know that Black people weren't giving people advice about what to do.
No, I work with a lot of young Black girls, Rael's age, and they don't know anything. Their mothers have not taught them anything. They don't know anything.
What's on TikTok? Maybe someone spit some wisdom on TikTok about narcissism or whatever. But until you come across those resources, like I personally, I've dealt with men who have different antisocial disorders within the Black community, and he's just this and that, 6 figures, like very well off. But I didn't know about manipulators. I didn't know about any of the signs around antisocial personalities. It was just like, he's a strong guy. He's just not connected with his emotions. Like, no, not having empathy is like, you're a sociopath. You should have some level of empathy. But
you know what, Rael, that's a really good point, because it raises the issue of financial security, because I think some people can also let their guard down when they're dealing with a more financially secure man. Like, like that's the thing that they need to lock down, and therefore they don't have to pay attention to other things. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because you said this person was 6 figures, right?
Yeah. Yep. So educated, 6 figures, still controlling with money. Still wasn't like I'm going to give you money because whatever, but what I was taught growing up, make sure you got a man with education, make sure he Black, make sure that, he get some good money. And he had spoken 2nd language. So that was even a better plus. But then I was trapped in this relationship that with someone who didn't have he was disattached to his emotions. You know, he had a really great mask on, and I didn't learn. It took me therapy to learn about masks and what do you look in when you're dating. And like, even I speak Chinese, so I was brushing up on my Chinese skills, looking at Chinese dramas, how the men in the dramas treat their women, like little signs of like care. And it's not even to build the script. It's not because some guy likes the other woman, and it's just little signs of affection. Oh, she coughs, so he's gonna give her hot tea after talking. I can't imagine a Black guy and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting you tea and do this. And it's not a romantic thing. And they write this in a show, and it's not to be like, oh, he wants to have sex with her in the future. It's just because she's a woman. She just like, let me care for you. Like, it wasn't until this year I really started thinking about like, how do other people, other cultures date, and how do they treat their women versus just like what's expected for Black women. And like, maybe I can get a good Black guy who will take me on some good dates. Like, you can expand, learn about other cultures, learn about other ways people date. And so like, if you do want to just date Black, you have those standards, or you know, like, this is how women who are valued by their men are treated. And that's not have to be with money. It's just caring, nurturing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that, this is so interesting. What I love about this movement is we're not taking it. We're not going to let you treat us a certain way. We're just not going to let, and if everyone participates in that, it's going to have to change. So that's the part I love about it. Like, I'm not submitting myself to this and that, A, B, C, X, Y, Z. But what I'm not sure about, and I know that, people might have different standards or different ideas, is whether or not in doing so, to certain traditional patriarchal stereotypes about what men should have and do versus what women should have and do. I know for me, I would want to raise some questions about some of that. Being tender, treating someone with care and thoughtfulness, that's critical. I mean, you want that. Anybody wants that. The support factor, the paying attention factor, all of that. But I don't personally be treated like a delicate flower. I mean, I certainly want and need protection at times as much as I want to give it at times. So I would raise some questions about that as well. How do expectations that are patriarchal and oftentimes even sexist play into what we see as adequate in terms of partnering, in terms of how people choose their partners and what they expect from their partners. But I love I'm not taking it. I'm not taking any of it at all, ever again. That's what I love about the movement, because why should we? Why should anybody? I'm not going to lie, though. I'm a little confused about the whole struggle part, the part about Black women being political activists for issues that might have to do with Black men.
Are you reading my questions? Because that's literally where I was about to take us.
No, I've heard some people talk about it because I was researching and trying to get more of a investment movement. I'm just not sure about that. Could you all explain that a little bit more?
So you're asking my next question. That's something that I've had little challenges with personally, because I grew up very politically my family, they write books on political stuff. I won't say that they're in the streets. A different sort of political activism. They're scholarly. But I have noticed like the talk about, or like the phrases of like mammyism, of Black women taking on burdens that benefit men more than it really benefits us, or movements that are meant for all of us, but then it becomes male focused, like the Black Lives Matter movement. Yes, there are some female names that we know, but a lot of those names were in response to the movement being taken over by like us talking about Black men and police brutality. And over the last year, we see a lot of like Black women in a lot of the marches. And when you look at pictures, you don't see as many Black men in those pictures. And so I feel on a surface level that I understand why some of the people are saying like, hey, divest your energy and especially if you're putting yourself in harm's way, if it's not going to perhaps benefit all of you all, if you're putting yourself in harm's way and you're not going to really But I would like to ask you all what you think, because I am trying to piece this stuff together too. I'm not a leader in this movement at all. I'm just watching. So that's what I'm getting, but I would love to hear your thoughts on what you,
I will say that in my interactions with Black women who are former, self-described social justice warriors, they said that their decision to divest was because once they were out there marching and fighting, they saw that there wasn't a level of attention and concern as it related to the girls and the women. They would go out there and they would see all these women pushing strollers out here with their babies, getting arrested, losing their jobs because they're skipping work so they could do this, and just very little reciprocation. There were issues where Black women were killed by police. For example, Breonna Taylor. On social media, when Breonna Taylor was killed, there were quite a few Black men who were like, well, what did she say? What did she do? These Black women, their mouths be popping off, they need to be quiet. Somebody, they're too mouthy. What was she doing? They want to have the full story. Like if something happens to a Black woman, they need to know the full story. They need to know, what if the moon was full. They need to know
the full investigation first.
Yeah, they need to know if you could see Venus that night. They need to know all of these variables. They need to know, was she a baby mama? Was she light skinned? Was she a swirler? How is she worthy of my protection? But when George Floyd got killed and we found out that, he was, he had a checkered past, and even held a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach, we were supposed to forget all of that, and talk about the bigger issue. But when something happens to a Black woman who is harmed, there's almost this gleeful, like, that's what she gets. That's what she gets from nothing. I was like this bloodlust. Every time I see a Black woman who's, I remember a little girl who got body slammed by a cop at her pool party. And you wouldn't believe all of the gleefulness and the laughing and joking from Black men and boys who were happy to see it, who felt like Black women need to be humbled.
I wonder if those are the type that wouldn't be marching for anybody. That's
but it doesn't matter. But see, the thing is that what I'm saying is that Black women are seeing this, and enough Black women are seeing this, and they're like, you know what? My care and concern is not being reciprocated. When something happens to someone who looks like me, I need to have 11 reasons why I'm innocent and perfect, and that makes me worthy to be protected. But it doesn't matter what the man did. He could have done whatever, and we need to all just fall in line. And Black women are just tired of it. They are. And so a lot of these are reformed social justice women who were out there in the trenches, out there in the streets, and they saw that there was just the reciprocity was not there, and they were done. And those were their experiences. And I think another thing too is that it takes a lot of courage for Black women to speak about their experiences, because people want to tell you that, well, not all Black men, you shouldn't categorize all of us. And, you need to, maybe it's it's kind of like they're blaming you. You need to choose better. It's about who you chose. It's about how you live your life. That where are you living? Where are you going? What kind of friends are you doing?
Yep.
It's as if, if something bad happens to you, you brought it on yourself. You know what I mean? As if these men who were getting arrested were just walking down the street going to Bible school. They weren't doing that. So it's just unfair. Like even as I talk about it, like it gets me upset because it's so clearly unfair. And then when you bring these things up, it's like, oh, you know, I think you're exaggerating, or, oh, is it really that big a deal? And it's like, yes, it is. You know, it's like, I mean, do you see the statistics? I'm going to be marching in Atlanta. There's a rally for Black femicide. There's a woman who's been keeping track of every Black woman who's been killed this year, and it's averaging out to be every 6 hours. Every 6 hours, a black woman or girl is killed. You don't hear about that. There is no outrage in the streets. There are no think pieces. There are no CNN headlines. There's nothing. There's nothing. Nobody cares. It's social media has made it very clear where the energy where the energy lies, where people want to put that energy in, who they really care about. And quite honestly, like I'm, you know, like I said, I haven't had these bad experiences, but I have heard all of these horrible stories for a decade now. And it's like, you guys, I mean, like literally academia, everybody, you guys need to listen to Black women. Like, stop prioritizing just the men. Stop using all these policies, just prioritizing them. These girls and women need you too. And they're getting tired and they're angry and they're sad and they feel like the community that is supposed to love them the most just thinks they're just throwaway things. And
well,
this is what we
I'm
are.
not an academic who prioritizes the men. If you look at the work I do, you could never say that. But
well, I'm just saying in general.
Yeah, but I get that. But once again, one of the reasons women and girls, Black women and girls, are dying like this is because of patriarchy and how it seeps into our cultures. And patriarchy disregards women and girls. They are property. They're not full agents. And I'm 100% convinced that is one of the reasons we're dying at the rate that we're dying. And so to me, if we really want to address these issues, we've got to address that. We have got to address the foundation of the ideology that says women are objects to be used for something. Girls are objects to be used for something. They're not agents in and of themselves. That's the reason that, you know, Western women always gave their names up when they got married, because they melted into their husband's identity. They left being property under their fathers to being the property of their husbands. And so to me, we've got to address those issues very carefully, very deeply in our religious institutions, in our familial institutions, in our cultural practices and norms, if we really want to change today for Black women and girls. So for me, I am all for it. This is why Kimberly Crenshaw started the African American Policy Forum. She does exactly that as well. She focuses on what's happening with women and girls in terms of death rates, in terms of homicide, and many other kinds of abuses and tragedies. So I am not against that. I just wondered, because I guess I don't know that activist scene in that way. When I saw pictures, when I saw stuff going on last summer, I saw women and men, but I don't know the ins and outs of what's going on and who's saying what. I certainly would not be privileging men in any social movement that for me, it would have to be the community. I just don't want to see a situation where we're at the point where we have to decide and pick and choose whether or not Black men's oppression or Black women's oppression is more significant or more. I'm just like, what happened to us? You know, what happened to us? I think what we actually have to do is focus on bringing the community together, and maybe in order to do that, we have to privilege women and girls. Probably that's how we have to do it. But we have to focus on bringing along men who are willing to stand up and say the same thing. You know, we need those allies. I don't want to be a sisterhood by myself. I know men who are the kind of men that can and will also support. I would like to see Black men be called to task and say, you need to step up and do and say this. You need to actually be a part of this movement as well and make these claims and make these kinds of, but that's how patriarchy functions. The best of them. Some of the best of them won't do it. It's going to make them look soft.
Yeah, I feel like you've definitely given me a topic for the next Black America Summit. We should definitely delve into patriarchy in Black America. I want to be respectful of your time. So I would like to give you all like a minute or so to just kind of give your final thoughts because it's the weekend. and y'all were so gracious to donate an hour of your time. So I just want to be respectful to you all. So if by any order, maybe Cheryl, if you would like to.
Yeah, I would like to jump in though at one last topic, and I hope everyone can stay right here with it. What Crystalline started with, and Diane, you've kind of alluded to, is that we haven't examined the issue of Black women and self-esteem. I think a big part of that goes back to that. There's nothing. One of the reasons I got into the research I did is that I had been on several college campuses, and it really pains me to see how Black women don't value themselves and their esteem issues. And we are seeing it all over society. And unfortunately, what gets glorified on some of these YouTube things that I don't watch that much of, I mean, the idea that we are doing everything possible with pink hair and phony. I mean,
butterfly eyelashes that look like they're about to fly away.
Buckle up against eyelashes.
And my youngest one is a makeup artist. And it just really disturbed her when she worked for MAC. And it really disturbed her, the number of Black women that would come in to be made up, that she said, Mom, they want to look like white women. And I think it goes to the heart of, again, some of the problems that then stem from that. And I also, before I get off and say my final words, I'm a recent widow. My husband died in May of 2020, but we had a very egalitarian marriage. I must say, he wanted to feel he's a protector. That's okay. But really, we really worked together on everything. And so I lost a husband. I really lost a partner. And if it had not been from him, I would have never done the research that I did. I would not have finished my doctorate. So unlike people that say with a Black man, they would say, well, your wife's going to be more educated than you. And he said, so, it never troubled him in any way. So I have to just at least acknowledge that not all Black men are that way. He was very comfortable that I got a PhD and, very supportive. And he took crap from men that, your wife's out there saying that interracial relationships. He said, you're not interracially related, interracial. Yeah. He said, I support my wife because she knows what she's talking about. So I just want to hit that thing with Black women and self-esteem as a topic.
Definitely. And Diane?
I'll let Crystalline go first.
Okay, Crystalline.
Well, I just want to say that for me, what I really want Black women to do is just start asking a different set of questions. Ask when cui bono, who benefits, cui mal, who is hurt. It's not selfish to think of yourself and put yourself first. And it is not heresy, and it is not being disloyal to your Blackness to pick the very best man for the job, regardless of race, color, or creed. Start having these questions, start listening. I want us all to start listening to Black girls and Black women, because there's a lot of people who need to just stop and listen. And so that is my deep desire, and that hopefully this conversation will move that needle a little bit into that direction.
Yeah, just based on what I've heard and what I looked at, what I researched for today, I would like to see Black women and men, although they're hopeless in every race, read more. They say men don't read. Once they get out of school, across the board, they just don't read. I would like to see us read more and inform ourselves more. Before getting on YouTube and listening to everybody about everything. I just think we need to do more of that as we divest. And ask ourselves deep, substantive questions about the difference between dating and marriage. You know, we're not marrying. Beauty is never going to save a marriage. It brings us together in terms of attraction, but they're deep-seated qualities of care for one another that is needed in any marriage to make it thrive. So in terms of what we're understanding to be the best, deepen how we define that for ourselves, and do that by talking to successful people who've been married for a long time, by getting answers, seeking answers from wise people. But once again, I focus more on the long term. What needs to happen long term? You know, we talk about what Black men do to us, what Black women do to Black men or Black children and what have you, but the system has done a lot to us. And many of these problems, no matter what we say, will not be solved without systemic and structural change. And so I just ask us to remember that, to be empathetic with one another as Black men and Black women, but Black women in that empathy continue to divest of anything that is toxic and harmful to you, no matter who's doing it to you, a parent, a grandparent, an uncle, a spouse. No matter what their color, their background, their heritage is, divest of anything that is toxic and harming you. But let's also be a little bit more empathetic with one another. We're hurting. We've been harmed, and it's not an excuse. It is a fact that we have been harmed transgenerationally, and until some of that is addressed, we won't address a lot of these issues that impinge on Black love.
Yeah, I think we hit upon a lot of really great topics today. And today was our first week of our 4-week summit as we looked at community. Next week, we'll look at health. And in that, we are talking about mental health and therapy and obviously COVID and all of that too. And y'all given us great topics for next year to think about. I would urge everybody to look at all the titles scrolling below and order these books, learn more. A couple of the people that I love on YouTube, I watch Lexus Exodus quite a bit. I watched The Pink Pill, Themis Atho, who's a male, who I feel like has a pretty great perspective. There are different resources out there, and I hope that we keep challenging ourselves and keep searching for true information.
Yes.
Right?
True facts.
Right, true facts. You know, dig into statistics, ask questions, push back. And that's the reason why I'm hosting Black America Summit. So thank you all for donating your time and joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And come back next week and check out the other panels.
Dr. Stewart, it's a pleasure seeing you.
It's good to be with
you. Cheryl, also a pleasure. Thank you so much, Rael. It was enjoyable, a very productive conversation.
Very much so.
Thank you.
Like, do you even know who you are?